15 seconds.
Okay. Welcome to the Tuesday, May 4th, 2021 concurrent regular meetings of the Walnut Creek City Council and the Walnut Creek Parking Authority. This meeting is being held in accordance with the Brown Act as currently in effect under the State Emergency Services Act, the Governor's Emergency Declaration related to COVID-19, and the Governor's Executive Order N2920 issued on March 17th, 2020 that allows attendance by members of the City Council, city staff, and the public to participate and conduct the meeting by video conference. Video conference locations are not open to the public. As some attendees may be participating in their first Walnut Creek City Council meeting or their first teleconference meeting, I wanted to welcome everyone and talk briefly about the public comment process. For each agenda item, there will be an opportunity for public comment on that item. Thus, if you desire to speak to an item on the agenda this evening, please hold your comments until the council considers that item. Additionally, we have a section on the agenda titled Public Communications, which is for public comments for items not on the agenda. Any comments during public communication should not relate to an item that is on the agenda this evening. Consistent with section 9.5 of the City Council Handbook, 30 minutes will be initially allocated for public communications for items not on the agenda. Additional time for public communications for items not on the agenda will be provided at the end of the meeting if necessary. This process is consistent with section 9.5 of the City Council Handbook, adopted July 15, 2014, and last amended on September 3rd, 2019, and will allow for all public comments to be received during the meeting for items not on the agenda. When I open the public comment period, please use the raised hand feature or press *9 if you're connected by audio only, which will alert staff that you have a public comment you would like to provide. We ask that everyone who wishes to speak to an item, please use the raised hand feature to state your intent to speak when the item is called. Please wait your turn, and once brought into the meeting, state your name and city of residence for the record. Please keep in mind that this is a city business meeting. The City Council has adopted rules of decorum to ensure that meetings are conducted efficiently and effectively, and that all members of the public have a full, fair, and equal opportunity to be heard. All remarks should be addressed to the City Council. Please do not use profanity during your comments. As the City Council is conducting these meetings via video conference, and given the COVID-19 pandemic and the increased number of speakers that have wanted to make comments on various issues during our meetings, and consistent with city policies related to public comments, each speaker will have 2 minutes to make your remarks. The Zoom feed for each speaker will cut off automatically at 2 minutes. The council will accept oral comments. Written comments submitted have been and will be posted to the city's website for public review and are included in the meeting record, but will not be separately read into the record. To provide a live remote public comment, join the Zoom video conference meeting. The meeting ID is 921-3450-0179, and the passcode is 693036. Should you choose to not provide comments but would like to view the meeting, you may do so in one of the following ways. YouTube Live, you can visit the City of Walnut Creek's YouTube channel. Cable broadcast on Comcast Channel 28 in the incorporated Walnut Creek area only, and Rossmore Channel 26, Wave Channel 29, and AT&T Uverse Channel 99, and live stream online on the city's website. And at this time, please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Would the city clerk please call the roll?
Councilmember Darling.
Here.
Councilmember Haskew.
Here.
Councilmember Silva.
Here.
Mayor Pro Tem Francois.
Here.
And Mayor Wilk.
Here. Okay, the first item on the agenda is a proclamation for Mental Health Awareness Month, which is in May. And so I will read the proclamation at this time. Mental health is essential to everyone's overall health and well-being. And whereas each business, school, government agency, healthcare provider, organization, and citizen share the burden of mental health problems and has a responsibility to promote mental wellness and support prevention and treatment efforts, And whereas effective treatment and often recovery are possible through appropriate medical, social, and culturally responsive support and services, and the community shares the responsibility to ensure those services are available to all residents. And whereas the continued climate of isolation and uncertainty caused by COVID-19 and the extended shelter-at-home health orders have prompted increased calls for help to the Contra Costa Crisis Center and other mental health resource providers. And whereas individuals and families living with mental health concerns share with all community members a right to fair and equitable treatment options with access to necessary resources, and whereas all stakeholders and community members effectively address and support the delivery of culturally responsive services and supports, thereby promoting resiliency and recovery and reducing hospitalizations and relapses. And there is a commitment and a need to increase awareness at all levels and educate the public, replace misinformation, and eliminate stigma concerning mental health, and promote understanding that people living with mental health challenges can lead productive lives. And whereas community organizations can effectively and creatively launch efforts to raise awareness and prompt discussion about mental health issues in a variety of ways. And whereas the city remains committed to expanding and improving 24/7 mobile crisis response throughout our region and supportive of a proposed 988 telephone hotline for people in crisis, and the City Council supports and recognizes the importance of raising the awareness of mental health needs, resource, and services. Now, therefore, I, Kevin Wilk, Mayor of the City of Walnut Creek, on behalf of the Walnut Creek City Council, do hereby proclaim the month of May 2021 as National Mental Health Awareness Month in the City of Walnut Creek, and encourage all citizens and civic organizations to promote mental wellness and support efforts to raise community awareness. Signed by Kevin Wilk, the Mayor. And City Clerk, if anybody from the public would like to comment on this, we can bring them in.
Sure, we'll bring in Gigi Crowder.
Thank you. I appreciate the opportunity to speak on behalf of Mental Health Awareness Month. This is maybe like the second time Walnut Creek has led the effort for acknowledging and lifting this up. So you've kept your commitment to do so, and I deeply appreciate it, starting with the former Mayor Haskew. Thank you. Continuing on, we got to keep it going. We also, I heard your proclamation, and I heard reference to the support for AB 988, which is also known as the Miles Hall Lifeline Act. So here at Walnut Creek, just as I said from the very beginning, Walnut Creek had an opportunity to lead this effort, and you're doing so with your investment of staffing for the county's non-police response program, which, you know, I'm advocating for that to also be named after Miles. I've been working on the team with one of your newly hired dynamic staff members, Marty, and we're making great progress with what we should have, which is alternatives to 911. So I just wanted to jump on here. It's been a while, and say, keep up the great work. NAMI Contra Costa County is available whenever you need us. We know that you allocated some funds toward the non-police response, and we want to partner with you as well on that effort. We don't want just that money just sitting there and not being used. We have great ideas of how it could be used. So let us know where you need the support to do that, and we'll be there for you. Again, thank you so much for this proclamation.
Thank you, Gigi. Any other speakers, Susie?
I don't see any additional speakers.
Okay. The next proclamation is for Public Works Week from May 16th to May 22nd. And we'll read this proclamation now. Whereas public works professionals focus on infrastructure, facilities, and services that are of vital importance to sustainable and resilient communities and to the public health, high quality of life, and well-being of the people of Walnut Creek, whereas such facilities and services could not be provided without the dedicated efforts of public works professionals, engineers, managers, and employees who are responsible for rebuilding, improving, and protecting our transportation, public buildings, and other structures and facilities essential for our citizens. Whereas Walnut Creek Public Works Department employs, maintains, operates, and provides engineering for 213 miles of streets, 171 miles of street markings, 1,650 street lights, 100 signalized intersections, 9,500 traffic-related signs, and 1,650 parking meters, 14,000 miles of street sweeping, over 4,000 catch basins, and over 100 miles of storm drain systems, 19 parking lots, 69 buildings, 171 on-road vehicles, and 175 equipment items, and 22 parks and greenbelts, totaling over 300 acres and over 3,000 acres of open space, with 9 miles of paved trail and 43 miles of unpaved trail. Whereas Public Works employees serve as first responders, providing essential services to our community during times of crisis. And whereas the quality and effectiveness of these facilities is vitally important to the economic development of a vibrant Walnut Creek. Whereas the support of an informed citizenry is vital to the efficient operation of public works systems and programs. And whereas the City Council supports and recognizes the importance of a qualified and dedicated Public Works Department.
I don't know if it's millions or billions of sales tax transactions that occur in California, entries and errors are made, and they review those. So Avenue would still have access to the Walnut Creek data just for any pending work in terms of audits, but everything else would move prospectively from Avenue to HDL.
So thus the reference to Muni Services in the resolution
Is for any pending work that they have at this point in time.
All right, thank you. That was my question. Thank you very much.
Would you like to make a motion?
I will move to adopt the resolution authorizing our move from Avenue to HDL for sales and transaction and use tax record work.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Susie, could you please call the roll?
Councilmember Silva.
Aye.
Councilmember Darling.
Aye.
Councilmember Haskew.
Aye.
Mayor Pro Tem Francois
Aye.
and Mayor Wilk.
Aye.
Motion carries unanimously.
All right, thank you. Next on the item is public communications. This portion of the meeting is reserved for comments on items not on the agenda. Under the Brown Act, the council cannot act on items raised during public communications, but may respond briefly to statements made or questions posed, request clarification, or refer the item to staff. Consistent with section 9.5 of the City Council Handbook, 30 minutes will be allocated at this time for public communications for items not on the agenda. Additional time for public communications for items not on the agenda will be provided at the end of the meeting if necessary. Does any member of the public wish to provide public comments at this time? Please use the raise hand feature or press *9 if you'd like to provide a public comment. For those who desire to provide public comments on an item not on the agenda, please raise your hand now so that we can identify the total number of speakers that desire to speak at this time. As a reminder, each speaker will have 2 minutes to make their oral remarks. The Zoom feed for each speaker will cut off automatically at 2 minutes. Written comments submitted have been posted to the city's website for public review and are included in the meeting record, but will not separately be read into the record. At this time, I will note that the time is 6:19, and we will take public comments on items not on the agenda until approximately 6:49, and then the remainder of any such comments at the end of the meeting. City Clerk, are there any members of the public who would like to provide comments?
Mayor, we do have some speakers tonight. We'll first bring in Colin Bosley.
Okay.
Thank you. So I was just coming to comment on the community cleanup event that the Youth Commission held this past weekend. And we wanted to thank Park Ranger Corey Frazier for helping us organize the event. It was a great success, and we really enjoyed getting to spend time with all of our volunteers, including Councilmember Haskew. We really appreciate you coming with us as well. And we hope to hold similar events in the future. And we'd like to just extend an open invitation to all council members and any people in the city who would like to attend and help to volunteer to make the city a better place. So thank you guys, and that'll be all.
Can I also point out how absolutely thrilled and proud I was to be a participant Our youth commission has some pretty amazing youngsters, and they are really gentle with us. I do have a warning, however, do not ever take the opinion of a well-built ranger about how hilly the walk is going to be. He thinks 45-degree angles are not too bad. Just saying. Thank you, Colin, for inviting me, and I really had a great time.
Thanks, Colin, and great work by the Youth Commission. Please tell them the City Council. It is just terrific to see these kind of things. And I also saw it was posted on social media. So great going. Thank you.
Next speaker is Pete Bennett.
Go ahead. Go ahead, Pete.
All right.
We can't hear you, Pete. Pete, I can see you're not on mute, but we can't hear you. Pete. We still can't hear you. Want to try talking?
It's
There we-
okay. There it is.
There you go. There you go.
Somebody, when the screen reset, everything reset.
Pete, I can see you're not on mute, but we can't hear you. No, now we can hear you. Go ahead.
Yeah, it always happens. Glitches. So listen, my name's Pete Bennett. You remember me? I know you do. I stood up in front of you many times. You know, the first time I
We
stood
still
up.
can't hear you.
Oh, fuck. Come on, man. It's working.
We can hear you. Keep going. We're talking.
Which is it? Can you hear me or can you not hear me? Put your thumbs up. Thank God it works again.
Pete.
Larry
There
Ellis. Okay, there it is.
There you go. There
All
you
right,
go.
I didn't touch Somebody, anything. when the screen reset, everything reset.
Pete, I can see you're not on mute, but we can't hear you. No, now we can hear you. Go ahead.
Yeah, it always happens. Glitches. Hold on a second. I think it's on. So listen, my name's Pete Bennett. You Hang on. Me? Hang on. I know you do. I stood up in front of you many times. You know, the first time I stood up.
Can't hear you.
Oh, fuck. Come on. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Oh, man, that's fantastic. Well, I have a separate screen open with apparently the coming over the internet. So that's what caused it. A lot of practice required here. So look, my name's Pete Bennett. I run a blog. You're not going to like it because I don't like any of you anymore because you've treated me so disdainfully for over so many years. I tried to run for public office and I was dragged out by police officers. I obey them when they carry guns. I just walk out the door. I tried to sue the town of Danville and they killed my witness in Bennett versus Collins. And then I found out about the case called Wood versus Contra Costa County. And Andrea Wood is a widow. Her husband graduated from Northgate with my friend, Will Digan, who was found dead in the creek in Martinez just a few months ago. It goes on and goes on and goes on. Doesn't end for me, but it ends for you. My computers, laptops, servers, everything's stolen. 25 years worth of software, all the records that I had to prove.
Okay.
Mayor, I don't see any additional hands raised.
Okay, we'll then end the public comments. And we will go to council member and staff announcements, reports on activities or requests. Do we have any closed session announcements?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. There was no reportable action from closed session this evening.
Thank you. Do we have any city manager reports?
Yes, I do have a couple updates this evening. Thank you, Mayor Dan Buckshire, City Manager, Walnut Creek. I want to provide an update on the mental health crisis response program that we are working on with the 18 other cities, the county, and dozens of other regional partners. There was another major milestone last week. Another rapid improvement event was held. There was a kickoff session last Monday and a report out last Friday. Considerable progress is being made on this effort. There, to briefly describe the rapid improvement event, there are roughly 50 various stakeholders and key participants in the process who meet 8 to 10 hours a day for 4 straight days to really hash out the various aspects of potential program changes, including research that's done of not only other cities and counties. They actually benchmark a city in England for how they approach mental health response, for a very different approach and concept for how things are done in other countries, in addition to just other cities or states in the United States. In short, major progress has been made on the call-in line for how to call something other than 911, whether it be 988 or 211, or if they're a referral, or even if someone were to call 911, that there be a process that could be somewhat uniform throughout the entire region to all of the dispatch centers, all of the call centers, all of the referral agencies, so there could be a determination of how to best direct the call, whether it be preferably to a non-law enforcement response that would be comprised of clinicians, or potentially a joint response with clinicians and law enforcement, depending upon the severity of the issue and whether there's any potential for violence or any weapons involved, that sort of thing. But the obvious goal is to have non-law enforcement response. I won't run through the details, but a lot of logistical work about how that would actually work, how the calls would be routed, the capacity needed, how to integrate that into the various dispatch centers at a minimum through all the dispatch centers of each of the cities and the county, and as I mentioned, all the other referral agencies. So great work on that front. Obviously, the other 2 main components are a non-law enforcement response and a 24/7 response. We're really hoping to begin an expanded approach of the current mobile crisis response team that's been changed, modified, and improved to pilot that this summer. And then another major effort is about expanding the care options, treatment options for those who called in for help. As we know, the options now are to go to psychiatric evaluation services for up to 72 hours, go to a hospital emergency room, or go to jail, which has become the default place for mental health. I think roughly half the inmates in county jails throughout the state are suffering some form of mental illness. There's a big effort to look at a formerly closed facility in Concord. And in fact, there was a joint request made of Congressman DeSaulnier for federal funding to help support the rehabilitation of that facility to serve as an additional treatment center. And it did make the initial cut through Congressman DeSaulnier's list, and he'll be forwarding that on to Congress for consideration. So great news on that front. There is another rapid improvement event that is scheduled for a couple weeks, and then we'll begin moving into piloting phase. Do want to mention funding is obviously a big discussion point of how do we fund this. There were requests that were made, again, through federal stimulus grants and programs that might be able to go for this program. There is also ongoing and continued discussion for Measure X funds, the countywide sales tax that was passed to help fund this. And I would encourage anyone who is listening, who is interested in this program, and they would like to see it funded through the Measure X funds, to contact their county board of supervisor to let that be known, because they will ultimately be making the decision, and this should be a high priority for the use of those funds. On a different but related note, our application period is open for our community-based diversity, equity, and inclusion task force. The application period closes this Friday. So anyone who is interested, I would encourage you to visit the city's website to submit your application by this Friday. And then we are also, on a separate again but related note, finalizing contracts for our trainers for additional training for all city staff, both law enforcement, non-law enforcement, related to equity and inclusion, implicit bias, and other various forms of training that will be developed specific for Walnut Creek. So we hope to begin the training sessions this summer, and more to follow. I know your council has expressed an interest in being the first to take some of that training, and we will certainly be pursuing that. So stay tuned for more info. And then lastly, and completely separate, is just a public service announcement that the city will begin charging for the purple poles for our meters that have the purple poles on May 18th. And I know this may be shocking to some folks, but one, this is related to, based upon the data that we're seeing that increased parking, but it's also based on actually individuals and businesses asking us to begin charging and enforcing for parking. I never thought we'd see the day that that would actually happen. But because the spaces they're not being charged and more people are coming downtown, those spaces aren't turning over as frequently, and it's creating some challenges for finding parking in the downtown area. So that will go into effect May 18th. And that's it for me this evening, Mayor.
Thank you, Dan. Next, we have City Council reports on AB 1234 activities, council member assignments, and various activities and upcoming events. And who would like to go first? Councilmember Silva.
Thank you very much, Mayor. About 10 days ago, Recycle Smart met. Mayor Pro Tem Francois is the chair of Recycle Smart. I am a member of the board with him. A couple of things to note. One is that we adopted our budget for the coming year. Within that budget is about $3 million of what I will call administrative costs, but 25% of that is related to school recycling programs, residential and commercial outreach programs, et cetera, related to recycling. The second thing we did was we learned that we had received, in partnership with White Pony Express, a $300,000 grant from Cal Recycle to basically implement and kick off the food recovery program that is required under recent legislation related to organics. And so that's really important. And in fact, Cal Recycle was in the area on Saturday and for an event in Concord, and mentioned it at that event that White Pony Express had received that grant. So we're excited about that. Our legislative action day for Cal Cities is next week. It's 2 days back to back, and it would be very helpful for those of us who are participating if staff could provide us with what we have taken positions on as a city, just a quick summary, so that we don't inadvertently say something that's different than what the city said. You know, what a good idea, maybe. The last week was the April meeting of the board of Cal Cities, and there were some things we did of note that I wanted to walk you through. First, I will say that we had a review of our finances because, of course, when all of the cities in the state are struggling financially because of the pandemic, we were very concerned about what might be happening at our state association. We did hold our dues payments steady with last year's rates. We did not have an increase in dues, even though they're allowed by our policies. But we were all pleased to hear that our revenues were coming in strong. And in fact, our membership dues were being paid at a more rapid rate than they were a year ago. So clearly people value their membership in Cal Cities, and our expenses are on target with budget. So that's good news. One of the things that we discussed extensively last week at the board meeting were some policy changes and recommendations from our Public Safety Task Force and our Public Safety Policy Committee. And if you will indulge me, this is my last item. I would mention what those are. That we will support the policies and use of resources to increase collaboration between first responder and health agencies for incidents involving mentally ill and substance abuse disorder populations. Another policy amendment was that we support resources for increased training and education for first responders to serve those living with mental illness or experience substance abuse disorders, as well as increased multidisciplinary collaboration. In addition to mental health screening provided by local hiring entities, Cal Cities supports resources and education to support the mental health needs of local public safety personnel. And finally, that Cal Cities recognizes the need to establish a peace officer decertification process through POST, which is the Police Officer Standards and Training Organization. So thank you very much, Mayor.
Thank you. Who'd like to go next? Councilmember Haskew.
Thank you. Gosh, I was going to talk about what a wonderful time I had with the Youth Commission at Borges Ranch, except for those hills. That was already discussed. And then I was going to speak about the mental health program and how amazingly complex it is. I watched the report, and for those of you that are interested, it is available on CCTV this week. And I found it ultimately by going to let's see if I can find it in my notes, the Community Crisis Health Response Initiative on the County Mental Health website, and then you get a link directly to it. If you have any interest in it at all, it's fascinating, and how really important the work is, and how much effort is going in, and how I feel everybody's heart is in exactly the right place. The only official meeting I had was at CCTA, where we issued the final approval for Walnut Creek's Measure J fund, which we will talk about later in the evening. We received an update on the Innovate 680 project. We looked at the funding allocation processes to fund sources and developments. One of the things that Contra Costa Transportation Authority does is get things ready and look for money coming down the pike from other places. And one of the things that I was especially interested in was they appointed me as their board representative at the California Association of Councils of Government, known as CalCog in short. So I'm going to be on a lot more meetings. Oh, and finally, I am reminded that there is Diablo Magazine has an event for which the RAA and the Lesher Theater is the beneficiary, and it's a special comedy event. So if you go on their website, it will be on May 11th, and look on events, and it was kind of sneaky and hard to find. It was a banner at the bottom of the page, but it looks to be fun. Comedy event, fundraising for DRAA and the LCA, the Lesher Theater. Don't be there or be square.
Thank you, Luella. And I'm just going to, Cindy Darling, thank you. Councilmember Darling.
Okay. Like Councilmember Haskew, I also watched the report out, and was just really gratified at the work that was going into the mental health response. My kids are young adults, and the challenges that they and their friends and neighbors and roommates and whatnot are going through in these years, we need to take care of them. And I really appreciate Mayor Wilk with the proclamation for Mental Health Month. I got another great tour from City Park staff. They tried to play stump the council member and see if I knew each park, and I actually knew most of them, but I didn't know the name of one. And then we also, all three of us were on the elected women's lunch the other day with Supervisor Candace Anderson and Karen Mitchoff, and we were celebrating that the county had met their goals on the vaccinations. And in our family, the last member of our family is vaccinated, so now we can go to Maui in a little bit. So life is looking up, but that's my report.
Thank you. And Mayor Pro Tem Francois.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, colleagues. I, along with Councilmember Silva, attended the Recycle Smart board meeting. She did a great report on that. The only other action item we had, for those interested, is we approved a provider services agreement for solid waste rate setting with Crow LLP. On April 23rd, I attended the mayor and commission chair meeting along with the city manager. Oh, the city manager wasn't there. Forget that. Strike that from the record. But other city staff was in attendance. We had a good showing from all the commissions including, we started off with the Youth Leadership Commission because they have school. And so we needed to hear from them first. And we heard about the Community Cleanup Day, which was mentioned earlier. And I really applaud them for taking the initiative and leadership on that item. And I hope to join them in a future event. We heard from the Arts Commission that pleased to report that the Bedford Gallery has reopened. And I was looking for this on one of their agendas, but I know that they had, I think it was within the last week or so, they had an agenda item dealing with a proposed mural that will go up on the side of the building next to Mel's. And I think it's a really interesting, fun mural. And so they considered that at their last meeting. The Transportation Commission reported on the CIP, which we have on our agenda tonight, as did the Pros Commission, as well as some signage improvements that are proposed by the Rangers in the open space, and the Trails recommendation that they had considered at their last meeting. The Planning Commission considered a use permit for Shake Shack and for a takeout window associated with that. The Design Review Commission seems like they were extremely busy. They had 5 or 6 or more items, including Shake Shack, Ostro remodel, which is going to be the restaurant that will go into the former Chili's building. Let's see what else we've got here. The library liaison reported on the new county librarian, the reopening of the library, which happened sort of a soft reopening. It's not completely open for the way it was before. There's social distance restrictions and things like that in place, but it's nice to know that our downtown library is reopened. We're waiting still a little bit longer on Ignacio Valley, given that it's still being used as a testing site by the state. Let's see. One more item to report. I attended the farewell bash along with all of you for the Chamber Executive Director, Jay Hoyer, who retired, I believe, after 30 plus years of service to this community. So we've all applauded him for his service and our comments in the chat. And welcome Bob Linscheid, I hope I said that right, as our new executive director. And we look forward to partnering with him and that great and dynamic group of board of directors. That is my report, Mayor.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. And my report, pretty much everybody's mentioned everything. Actually, regarding Bob Lynch, I look forward to him coming to a future council meeting in the not too distant future to introduce himself to the community and hear some reports up from the chamber. And as the Mayor Pro Tem mentioned, there was the Commissioner Chair, Mayor Pro Tem meeting. He did a far better job describing this than I ever could, so I'm just going to let that one stand. Thank you for that very thorough report. And we're looking forward to the city continuing to reopen with a plan. Walnut Creek is one of the leading cities in the county in percentage of population vaccinated. So keep up the great work, and we can continue to put this pandemic behind us and move on with our lives in most of the ways in which we were accustomed to prior to March 2020. Vaccination sites are now taking walk-ins, so please get vaccinated if you are 16 and over or eligible. And I believe there's going to be new eligibility coming just next week. I also wanted to remind our community members of a couple of key opportunities available to our residents. Through the end of the week, we're accepting applications from Walnut Creek residents, and as you heard from the city manager, that would like to serve on the community diversity, equity, and inclusion task force. And I will be chairing that, and Mayor Pro Tem Matt Francois will also be on that. So the follow-up interviews will take place in the weeks ahead. Please go onto the city website and you can download the application and turn that in. Round 2 of our Heroes Among Us campaign kicked off this week, as we again hoping to hear from our community about those people making a difference during such a challenging time. Please get those nominations in. And lastly, we have openings on our Park Recreation and Open Space Commission and also the Advisory Council on Aging. Applications are due for those on May 12th, and applications for all of these can be found on our city website. So they are there right now. And that brings us to the end of our activities. So the next is our consideration item titled the Draft 2022-2031 10-Year Capital Improvement Plan, or the CIP, and the Draft 2022-2023 Capital Budget. And I will turn this over to staff for the presentation.
I had to do it.
May the 4th be with you.
Sir. Let me see if I can operate the computer. All right. Good evening, Mayor, City Council, and members of the public. I'm Carlton Thompson, Senior Civil Engineer over the Capital Program. Thank you for the opportunity to present the draft 2022 and to 2031 Capital Improvement Plan. I want to thank our capital project engineers, our maintenance teams, and arts and rec managers for their hard work and input on this over the past few months. Steve Waymeyer, Rich Payne, Mike Vickers, Jake Allred, Jeff Jolivet, Alex Wong, Mike Hawthorne, Sandra Naughton, Scott Dennison, and many others have been critical in the development of this plan. Steve Waymeyer will help me answer questions. There may or may not be something missing and a typo or two in the draft, but these are not the droids you're looking for. It is May the 4th. It comes with its own puns. The rest of this presentation is scheduled to be important, but boring. This evening, I'll visit the CIP and capital budget development process before we dive into each of the cycles, with capital budget being first. As we progress through the presentation, I'll go over the projected use of expected funds and highlight a couple of projects contained in that particular 2-year cycle. The presentation will stay at a high level, spotlighting only a few of the proposed projects. We'll take questions, and after public comment, we'll look forward to receiving council feedback. This slide illustrates the various inputs that go into the development of the 10-year CIP. The CIP pulls from a variety of stakeholders, including the Transportation Commission, Pros Commission, and our asset management systems. It includes resources like the TIF project list, asset management MMPs, and pavement reports. We are updating the CIP in conjunction with the development of the capital budget. As you know, the 10-year CIP informs the capital budget. Typically, the first budget cycle of the CIP is the proposed capital budget. The CIP is a long-term 10-year planning tool prioritizing programs and projects over 5 2-year cycles. The capital budget appropriates funds to specific projects. This capital budget is a return to our normal 2-year cycle and from the last budget, which was a 1-year capital budget. Where are we in the development, in the budget process, and who's involved? First, we've identified available funding with the Finance Division. Then we identify potential asset management projects from the MMP and our walkthroughs of the facilities, along with input from maintenance staff and user groups. We hear from our Transportation Commission, Pros Commission, the Finance Committee, and of course, City Council. What this slide doesn't tell you is how in-depth our stakeholder engagement process is and how involved our iterative process internally of prioritizing projects can be. A lot of staff work with input from all different staff levels in the community goes into the project development process. And what are the next steps? Today, we're here to go over the overall CIP program and discuss projects, timing, and potential allocation of funds. We'll go to the Planning Commission next to receive concurrence that the plan is consistent with the general plan and make any necessary adjustments before bringing the first CIP cycle to the council as the capital budget. Our intention is to adopt the capital budget with the operating budget, and if ready, also adopt the 10-year CIP. The 10-year CIP is important for our outside partners, CCTA, MTC, FEMA, FHWA, Caltrans, and others, to show them we have a plan when applying for grants and other funding opportunities. This Pareto chart shows where the funding comes from, as well as how much from each source in sum over 10 years. Over the course of the next 10 years, we see spending over $84 million on infrastructure. This represents the city's investment in maintaining our infrastructure and modifying it to meet the needs of the community. The bulk of the CIP funds currently comes from gas tax, and the next largest contributor is the general fund. Here we're showing the demand for funding by cycle and project category. You can see that we are consistent with asset management, the blue bars, and that the other categories' demand varies when specific projects are forecast to need funding. FY 26-27 are programmed with a large investment in parks projects, and in 24-25, 28-29, and 30-31, there is demand for transportation projects. But just because there is demand for improvements doesn't mean there's funding. Some of the projects in this update of the CIP have been sliding to the right on the calendar, waiting for funding. For the first cycle, 22-23, we have to recognize that we were coming out of the pandemic. Last year, we had a one-year capital budget to adjust our internal processes, and then the pandemic struck, forcing us to also resize the capital budget. This budget is smaller. This budget is a return to a two-year budget, but will be smaller than past two-year cycles. Some projects that were pushed to the right for the FY 2021 budget are included in this budget, but not all of them. We need to remain conservative with our revenue forecast for funds that are tax-based. Additionally, we continue to save for the large demand for funding in the parks in FY 26-27. Here's a visual representation of the allocations indicated in the attachment for the first cycle, also known as the capital budget. This demonstrates that we use money from all different allocations and sources. We aren't relying on any one source, any one funding source. Slightly more than 22% of the capital budget is from the general fund. Combination of gas tax for roadway projects is approximately 40% of the overall capital budget. The total fund allocations differ from the total shown on attachments 1 and 2 to slightly more than $1 million, which was previously allocated for the design of a Your Parks, Your Future Phase 1. That's already in the capital program. So you're going to see in that bottom of that capital budget, we show 17 million. You see on the slide, I'm showing 16. That's because there's already $1 million in the capital budget already for that one particular item. Now, where does the money go for the proposed capital budget? Notice that 3/4 of the spending is going towards maintaining our infrastructure, meeting a major council objective. The attachments to the staff report and the worksheets in attachment 3 provide additional details on each of the proposed projects. But the whole right side of that graph plus the lower portion are all asset management. So the proposed two-year budget is smaller, but comparable to the 18-20 capital budget, which was an overall $19.5 million. So this one is about $2 million less. Roads will include projects for sidewalks. So we've got 7.4 for roads and bridges. The general fund will focus on facilities, 59% or $1.9 million, and also support for storm drain and traffic signal repairs and maintenance, ADA transition plan projects, so curb ramps and median work make up the balance of that 3.3 million. So we'll start highlighting a couple of projects in each of the cycles, beginning with the FY 22-23 project spotlight for Parks and Open Space project, which is proposed phase 1, Your Parks, Your Future. This proposed project is the initial phase of design to get the project started. Bringing on a design and construction team takes time, and the earlier we build a good team, the better project we can have at the end. Of course, we still need input from the Your Parks, Your Future team that's been working out all the details with the community. And this Spotlighted Transportation project is an opportunity project. We have an opportunity to partner with 2 developers to make this section of Broadway between Ignacio Valley Road and Civic better for families and workers. The current street is wide from sidewalk to sidewalk. The proposed design will make it easier to cross, as the distance for the pedestrian will be shorter. It also provides for bicycles, helping connect the north downtown to the core. This project will allow staff and necessary consultants to create preliminary designs, work out requirements for adjacent development, and scope out design ideas. This next slide shows the program demand for funding in the second cycle of the CIP, so in the FY 24 and 25. This chart will match the total at the bottom of that of the attachment 1 at the cycle, and not necessarily match the estimated funds available at the top. This programming gives us a sense of what is to come, but is not as refined as what we need for a budget. Think of them as goals. This budget cycle and the following cycles will also show unfunded needs for specific projects. This is where we will target funding opportunities in future cycles. The unfunded needs are not shown on the chart. And in this cycle, we'll start with the spotlight on the transportation project that we were designing in the previous one. This proposed project is for the construction of the Broadway Road Diet project. We really do need a better name for this one. This is where the Affordable Housing Sustainable Communities grant would also be applied for the developer to get it, as well as contributions or other construction with adjacent development. On the slide is a couple of cross sections showing proposed and existing layouts for the lanes. This next project is the YVR corridor study. This project will help us prioritize projects along the corridor that are shown later in the CIP. This proposed project was a high interest item for the Transportation Commission. We feel this project has a wider impact than just the city over the long term, so we pushed the project into this cycle to allow us to explore funding opportunities with the Contra Costa Transportation Authority and the Metropolitan Transportation Commission. So next, we'll look at the demand for funding in the third cycle of CIP out in FY 26 and 27. As a reminder, this chart will match the total at the bottom of the cycle and will not necessarily match the estimated funds available at the top. You also notice the chart does not show the unfunded needs again. The next spotlight project would actually be the construction of the phase 1 project out at Heather Farm. This would be after all the design and bidding are complete. And the second project in the FY 26-27 would be the traffic signal master replacement. This project replaces and updates significant components to our traffic signal network. This was last done in the mid-2000s. And as the pace of technology continues to move forward, eventually these smart components will no longer be smart and will need reinvestment. A third project in this cycle is a downtown project, and this the initial design phase of this project was pulled from the 18-20 budget for budget balancing. We were hoping that we can work to reimagine the way this important shopping and dining corridor works for our businesses and residents. There will need to be utility updates that happen before this project from East Bay Mud and potential others before we go to construction. And moving quickly along out into FY 28 and 29, this shows the program demand for funding for the fourth cycle of the CIP. And in this cycle, this proposed project provides a connection from the west downtown to the Iron Horse Trail at Newell and South Broadway by widening the bridge over San Ramon Creek. That's the one over there by Broadway Plaza. And I only highlighted one on that one. In this slide here is into the last and fifth and last cycle of the 10-year CIP for FY 30 and 31. So we're getting pretty far out there. And a couple of projects to highlight. The first one is in the downtown, and it's the replacement of the parking management system. We just recently did this, and why is it on the 10-year CIP? Well, that's primarily because the life cycle of these parking management systems is about 10 years. It was about 10 years prior, maybe a little bit longer, from replacing the one that prior to the one we just did. So we know that these systems start to need major maintenance and or replacement at the 10-year mark. We've inserted this project into the CIP as a way to track and program funding for this part of our infrastructure. And then this last one is another transportation one. This project consists of a new Class 1 bike path on Ignacio Valley Road from Viamonte to Bancroft Road. Oak Grove Road is connected to Viamonte through the Safeway project that was done a couple of years ago. This facility in this proposed project would be located in an existing landscape area on the north side of the roadway. It would not have a negative impact on vehicular traffic, resulting in safer travel for both bicyclists and motorists. The project is aimed at completing the bike pathway network on the east side of the city and will allow additional bike connections between Bancroft Road and Oak Grove Road. So I gave you a brief highlight of the overall CIP, and I can go into detail on any specific project. We wanted to leave time for your council to ask questions. This concludes my presentation, and if you found any errors, we will work hard to correct them before coming back. Steve Waymeyer, who will also be available for questions.
Thank you, Carlton, for your report from the Death Star. Do we, okay, so I'm sure there are questions here from council. So I'm looking, who would like to start first on questions?
I don't want to go first, but I do have questions.
Okay, Mayor Pro Tem Francois.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Carlton, for the update. I was curious about the gas tax. Obviously, it seems likely that there will be more and more electric and zero emission vehicles going forward. So how does staff project gas tax revenues? It looked like they were going down in those outer years. Was that right?
Yeah, you'll see that we're trying to be conservative with it, because when we look backwards, we start to see that when we take the estimates that come from the state, we don't necessarily realize all of that revenue that are forecast. And you'll notice that if you pay attention to that, you'll notice that they adjust those twice a year, right, in May and in January. So we're trying to be conservative with our estimates. We haven't always done that. And that's what you see in the CIP for right now. My confidence level is not all that good, given us coming out of the pandemic with what's coming, the estimates that are coming forward. But we'll continue to watch that.
Do you have any sense what we'll still have vehicles impacting the roads? At what source of revenues will have to backfill the gas tax?
No, I don't.
One other thing that struck me in your presentation was the costs of some of the studies, just the studies themselves, or kind of the designs. Maybe you can speak a little to that, primarily on the Ignacio Valley corridor study.
Yeah, that study, we looked at that with traffic engineering, the study is going to involve a consultant to do that work. We can't do that internally. And we also think that that's going to take a lot of public input, not only from Walnut Creek, but from the surrounding communities, and along with CCTA staff. So we program that in the CIP to be fairly high. We don't really know so much about how that really is going to cost until I go out for an RFQ. But that's the guess right now between us and traffic engineer.
Okay, and my last question had to do with Your Parks, Your Future, the phase 1 project. Maybe if you can just, I know that there's a design element to it first, but the actual project and construction, which I think was out in 24 to 26, or what does that entail, the pool and what other elements?
Right. So on the worksheet, you'll see that the description is roughly what was presented to council last January. So which is the pool and the community center. However, the Your Parks, Your Future group has still has some work to do in vetting all of that out. And so we're still waiting. Well, we still have there still are some decisions to be made going forward about what that really looks like. So that first design is to start to, for us to start to pull together a design, go out and get some RFQs together and start to get some designers on board is sometime in that 22-23 budget cycle, so that we're not caught behind the Your Parks, Your Future group, and when they're ready to actually give some more direction along with the council.
Let me just add to that briefly, if I could, Councilmember Francois. So currently our plan is on May 18th to provide an update to the council on the 5 priorities that you set about a month or 2 ago, which infrastructure and more specifically Your Parks, Your Future was one of those. So we'll be bringing back an outline of a scope of work, seeking feedback from council, and then we would be coming back sometime thereafter in the not too distant future with a specific update on Your Parks, Your Future to discuss scoping and next steps to really delve into the details. So this is a placeholder right now to map this out from some seed money and also from a staff resource perspective, but we'll be waiting for further direction from council before we delve into any actual work.
So let me interject there for a minute, Dan. So thank you, because this was the one question that I had that really stuck out. I'm no architect, that's for sure, but $2 million for a design, if we're going to get the details at that meeting, can we get the details of why a design is $2 million, what goes into that? Because obviously that's a big chunk of what we've been telling the community of what the entire pool would cost, or the project would cost.
Yeah, we can certainly do that. I would just add, if I off the top of my head, and Carlton can speak in more detail, I believe the rough estimate for the pool, the bathhouse, and the community center combined was in the neighborhood of 50 million. And so full design would likely be much more than just 2 million as part of that. That's just initial scoping and getting it off the ground. So I would anticipate the design work will be several $1 million actually.
For context, the library was close to that number at the end of the day. And about 16% of that budget went to design and all the project management, which is where I get the total number that you see in the CIP. And so if you take 50 minus 42, you kind of already know what I'm looking at.
Okay. All right. Thank you. That helps now. Councilmember Darling.
Okay, thank you, Carlton. It's always fun to visit the Death Star and hear about all these great nerdy infrastructure things.
I had to do it. It's too much fun not to do
it. You said something about unfunded needs don't show. I'm presuming that I've heard that turf fields are being put off a ways. Is that one of those things that's an unfunded need that doesn't show, or was I missing it somewhere in there?
No, in general, in the CIP, in those years that aren't in that first cycle, any project that doesn't have just some definite funding that we know we have control over will put out there in the unfunded side, and you'll see that in the far right hand column in that in attachment 1. Though for example, the Ignacio corridor study is also has an unfunded need. That's because we want to go out and ask money from CCTA to help fund that So we've asked Transportation Commission to help us with a portion of that, but we're also recognizing that that study impacts more than just Walnut Creek, looking for a partnership there. And that is true throughout the CIP. So I just didn't chart that because it starts to then in some budget cycle starts to just engulf the rest of it.
Yeah.
Pie chart turns into a donut.
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah. And so I guess there's a little bit of an art because when I was doing my parks tour the other day, and we look at this park and we talk about bocce here or improving pickleball here or doing there was a bunch of smaller, not such flagship type things as the Clark Swim Center. I'm presuming that those just kind of come along as unfunded until we are ready to.
Yeah, if you look, I think we did put some funding towards bocce very clearly with the Pros Commission that bought off on that we did push them out a little bit. So they're not in 22-23. But we did push those out. But I mean, they're shown, there's definite funding shown towards those projects in the CIP. So those are not shown as unfunded.
Okay, so you do have, not everything is waiting for your parks, your future in the parks end of things. There's something.
Yes.
Okay. And then when we get to your parks, your future, we'll get to decide how big it is when we go to figure out.
I imagine the next time we do this update, there'll be some, it'll flip around a little bit.
Okay. And then things like the Locust Streetscape, this is a relatively small pot of money, but I never knew where it went. When we let somebody take a tree out and get money from them, does that go into something like the Locust Streetscaping, or does it just, where does it go?
That I don't know. When somebody takes a tree out and they have to pay us, is that what you're saying? The tree funds?
Yeah.
I think Steve or Heather could jump in and answer that one.
Yeah, so it does go to replacing trees downtown, but it's more of a spot replacement than actual projects.
Okay, we don't budget it into a more.
Not necessarily. Usually Mike Vickers and his group will spend it on replacing trees. I think we use some of it for some of the landscaping on Tice Boulevard there.
Okay.
So it's usually projects like that, not bigger projects like this.
Okay, yeah, I knew it was little money. So, and then moving from the little money to the big money, there is a lot of talk about a federal infrastructure bill. And have we been thinking about, I know with the ERA funding back in 2008, 2009, there was a lot of emphasis on shovel ready. And I think I'm hearing more talk about shovel worthy this time, and that infrastructure bill will be a little bit longer term expenditure. Are we thinking of lining up things that are shovel worthy that could, if we do get a federal infrastructure bill, bring into play?
Yes, we have some paving projects that are pretty much almost shovel ready to continue down YVR. We are in the current capital budget. We have a paving project for YVR this summer. We have plans nearly complete for another phase. And staff is preparing to set up and be able to start designing another one. You also notice that in one of the budget cycles, there's the Ignacio fiber project, which is to extend the fiber network that we have up through the Ignacio corridor with some existing conduit. And this is really to tie all our traffic signals together with and cameras to a faster network. And that project, we have a lot of data and a lot of info. We're currently pulling together a shell of some plans so that if we did get that funding, all of a sudden we could go forward fairly quickly with it. Even though it's shown further out in the CIP, it is in the CIP. Again, to reemphasize that, that's why the CIP is important, because it shows our other partners that we have a plan for additional resources if you gave them to us.
Okay, so if they focused on broadband, green infrastructure, we're ready for, we have things that we can pull forward, compete well.
We could pull forward. Yes.
Okay,
Let
thank
me
you.
add to that a little bit, just so a little more information. We've been
Yeah.
working with Representative DeSanye's group
Mhm.
and getting projects lined up for possible earmarks and for possible federal funding. And so the last presidency, I'd assumed we were going to have something similar to this. So we did shelve projects because we knew from the original ARA stuff that we would have these. So we've had projects sitting around for 4 years on the shelf. And so anything that's ready to go, we've been anticipating. We learned from last time to have these projects ready to go. Especially federal projects are difficult because there's different kind of requirements for them. So we kind of cleaned up some projects so they're ready to go for federal funding. So we're set for whatever we get in a good position.
Great. Thanks, guys.
Okay, Councilmember Haskew.
Don't mean to short Councilmember Silva, but she always has way more questions than I have.
Hoping some of mine get checked off.
Okay, well, I just really have one question, and that is, when we put them in the CIP and they are unfunded, is there any kind of sense about, by the time the 10-year period rolls out, that there is an 80% chance that our unfunded projects will find additional funding? Or are we just sticking our fingers in the air and hoping?
I'm hoping we have a better chance than 20% for getting some of these projects. And we've been successful. It really depends on where we're targeting that funding, or we think that potential funding will come from. But as you recognize in the CIP, there are some projects that you just can't save for. You do really have to look at the whole suite of options for funding a project, whether that is to rely on grants from outside agencies that support those types of projects, or whether it's to continue to be creative, or to really go back. And I'll say the word that we don't want to necessarily say all the times, but we have done it in the past in Walnut Creek, which is to go out and look at bonds and other funding mechanisms to fund some of these projects. It has been done in Walnut Creek. It's just been a very long time.
Thank you.
Councilmember Silva.
All right, thank you, Carlton and Steve and the whole team on this. First question is, I don't remember doing the 10-year CIP and the capital budget quite at the same time. So can you clarify that it's harder to do it at the same time, even if I'm sure it is incredibly hard for you. It's hard to keep track of, am I reading the current budget or the 10-year vision? And so please assure me that we don't have to do this in the future.
No, here's what happened. We pushed off, because of the 1-year budget and some other things, we pushed off the update in 2019 that we started. But if you go too long, you get out of sync with CCTA, who requires a 5-year plan be updated every so often. And quite honestly, if we don't get this one updated here pretty soon, or by the end of the calendar year, CCTA will be saying, hey, you guys are out of compliance with what we want you to be for projecting for transportation funding. So yes, you are absolutely correct.
So ideally, when will we do this? We won't do the CIP in 2 years. We'll do it sometime. We'll do it again in another year or so, and then it's work.
Yeah, I imagine that as we kind of get on the backside of some more of this Your Parks, Your Future discussion, that it might be time to come back and look at that again. And, of course, as we get come out of the pandemic, it might be smart to do it again.
So I thought Mayor Pro Tem Francois asked a really good question, and I was surprised that Councilmember Haskew didn't jump in, because of the whole issue of gas tax versus how are we going to fund the shift to all electric vehicles. Are we keeping an eye on the vehicle miles travel discussion, and basically how that might progress over time?
And I know staff is, especially the traffic engineering team. Yes.
Great. You did mention Your Parks, Your Future. So you said at the beginning of your presentation that the 10-year CIP reflects about $84.5 million in something, but I don't think that includes discretionary projects for some reason. I think that sounds like just the asset maintenance, because at $50 million for Your Parks, Your Future, that wouldn't leave a lot left, or is my math?
Right. So yes, there's a big giant unfunded hole out there for a number of
Okay.
projects.
So that's really reflecting of the unfunded portions. The 84.5 million is what we know we can secure.
Yes, because it's a combination of general fund, gas tax, and developer
Great.
funds that we're projecting forward. Great.
Perfect. Are we actually related to your Parks Your Future and waiting for the council and the committee to make a decision? Are we actually thinking of just hiring an architect? In which case I'm going to say that for the library 20 years ago, that was a competitive process and the community participated in looking at samples, et cetera. What's the vision here?
Well, I know for me, I know that it, like with the library, it took a while to get that process to go. So yes, getting started sooner rather than later is the goal of that first project in this FY 22-23 budget. Whether or not it would be an architect or a specialized firm that would deal with, or a combination, is something that I think that we'll start to take some direction on from the consultant that's leading your Parks Your Future.
Somehow the community gets a little territorial when you start erecting buildings and don't ask what they should look like. And so,
I agree.
okay. I did send you these questions in advance. So thinking back to the last 2 years, and you mentioned one that was, what capital projects, if any, were cut from the last capital budget, either this one we're in or the 2018-20, in order to really address the collapse of the economy during the pandemic. And so which project, you mentioned the designing of the Locust Street streetscape project.
Yeah, there was a little bit there. There was a creek study that was pulled. There was some money pulled that was for Clark Pool sustainability. There was some money in there that was pulled, and I can't quite remember. I think there were 4 that we pulled for the budget balancing, or maybe not everything out of that particular project, but we pulled a portion of funding to help for that. In FY21, as we built that capital budget with the reduced operating budget, then there was a reduction in what we could go after there. So there were some facility projects, which the bulk of the facility projects are funded from the general fund. In all, that's the only funding source for the asset management side of the facility projects.
So is this next 2-year capital budget taking care of what was, for your term, scuttled? Term.
Some, but not all. As much as I can fit within the fence that I have.
Okay. And are there any COVID-19 infrastructure improvements that we still have yet to do? Every day when you go out someplace, you notice that people have plexiglass up and all of these things in order to reopen for business. Are we done with what we need to do to be able to fully reopen for business in our arts and recreation facilities, in City Hall?
Capital doesn't get too involved in most of that right now, mostly because it's been handled on the operating side.
So
Steve can answer some of that.
Yeah, so it's my understanding, and maybe Dan can help us here, that in the operating budget, there's a request for some funds to do some more work. And it's mostly to do with the air handlers and stuff, but a lot of that's been done with our internal budget. So the existing budget, but there is a request for some additional funds to help out with recreation.
I notice in the parks projects for the capital budget, there's 1.3 million in park in lieu funds that will be used for maintenance projects. It struck me as much higher than in past budget cycles. I have heard concerns expressed before, maybe they're not correct. One of our former colleagues, that if we're spending the in lieu funds on maintenance, they may not be qualifying correctly. Do we have any concerns about this?
Yeah, if you look at that, we don't have any concerns. If you look at that, the way that number is calculated in the capital budget, you'll notice that one big thing that stands out there is $750,000 for rebuilding the tennis courts at Heather Farm, which get a lot of use and have gotten a lot of use during the
So you're
pandemic.
looking at it as a rebuild that was required for capacity enhancements?
Well, some of those courts weren't not all the courts were rebuilt in 2000. There were some of them that were rebuilt in 1997. So those courts are older than I think we realize. There's a lot of work that's done to keep the surfaces looking pretty good. We recently did some in 2017. We resurfaced, I think, not all of them, and then we did some work out there in the 1820 budget. But those courts that are in the 1997 construction or reconstruction phase are showing their age in a significant way, along with a lot of the fencing out there. So when we start to look at when we get into dealing with that, we put what I think is a more realistic budget on the construction side of it, because quite honestly, we also expect, and although we haven't really completely seen it, that the labor and materials costs are going to go up as we go into the next budget cycle. So some of my numbers in this 22-23 are in expectation that those costs will come in higher as we go out to bid for those projects. But so the remainder of that 1.3 million is in the different categories of the parks maintenance, wholesale, and not just focused on the courts.
So the answer is you are comfortable, and staff is comfortable, that we can use $750,000 out of the in lieu funds for the rebuilding of the Heather Farm tennis courts.
Yes.
So it brings me to my next question, which is that a subsequent two-year budget cycle actually identifies $375,000 for rebuilding tennis courts at Red Gear and at Arbolado. The Pros Commission had a lengthy discussion with you about this, but I don't think they got to the real question, which is why not just take what is already effectively programmed and is in our in lieu funds and pull it forward into this budget cycle? Would there be any financial advantage in terms of contracting if we did all of the tennis courts in this next two-year budget cycle?
Yeah, I don't know if there's a financial advantage, but for me, when I built the budget the way you see it, is that I looked at it as a workload issue for us and also an impact issue for the community, and how many tennis courts, if I did contract them all out at once, how that would impact the community.
Thank you. That makes sense. They also asked, the Parks and Rec Commission also asked about things that had been planned but not yet implemented, specifically planned improvements to Alma Park. Are there any that are hanging out there that we should be capturing in the near term?
No, they did most of those projects with that first phase, and I don't know if Mike's on or not, but they did most of the projects already. Mike still has one. Mike Vickers still has one thing out there, I think, hanging out there, but
Mike just texted me what they are. Right, Carlton. I just got a text from Mike what they are. So it says an Old Oak Park trails, some park course equipment type work, LaRue Phase 1, and some Red Gear Park stuff. And so there has been projects that have been kind of pushed off a little bit, and this is a dynamic process. And so what you think 2 years ago was going to be an important project may have slowed down a little bit. LaRue isn't getting the traction that we thought it was going to, so we put that project off a little bit. So, and it is a balance, we can't do everything. And so knowing that we want to save some funds for Your Parks, Your Future, some of these projects have been put on hold, but they've been thoughtfully put on hold.
Okay, thank you. There is a pond irrigation project 2 years out, I think it is. Does anyone think that would qualify for the water projects in the rescue plan money, or are we holding something like that? I mean, is it a water project?
Well, it uses water out of the canal, so It's not a potable water project, which I think is really the focus for those funds.
Okay.
But we are looking at into that to see if it would qualify.
Right. Last two questions. The Shadelands project, it's a transportation project. That special district, are those funds eligible to be used for that?
I got this one. I've lived this for a while here. So the Shadelands Local Improvement District funds are funds that were left over from when they actually built the project. And our legal counsel has told us that they can only be used for maintenance of what was actually built. And so what we're proposing to do is actually add some sidewalk that wasn't in the original plan. So that's not available to use for that project. But if we were going to overlay the street or do any work to maintain any of the drainage or anything else, then we could use those funds for that.
So we're targeting those at some point to be brought in.
Definitely.
Yes, and the scoping for the project right now with my teams to work together as we go to do the sidewalks is also look at the paving aspects of it and do all that as one project, so that we smartly impact that roadway once.
And actually, I think I have my questions answered. I'm sorry, everybody, but thank you. And thank you for the excellent work on this. This is a lot of complicated work, but to have a good plan and to know where we're going allows us to really find the money for it. So thank you.
I had a couple questions, but they were answered along the way. So let's see if there's any public comment on any of this. And if any member of the public wishes to provide public comments at this time, please use the raised hand feature or press *9 if you'd like to provide a public comment. For those who desire to provide public comment on this consideration item, please raise your hand now. As a reminder, each speaker will have 2 minutes to make their oral remarks. The Zoom feed for each speaker will cut off automatically at 2 minutes. Written comments submitted have been and will during this item be posted to the city's website for public review and are included in the meeting record, but will not be separately read into the record. Also, please note that during public hearings and consideration items, group spokespersons are allotted 10 minutes in lieu of other members of the group speaking on the item. We trust that everyone will follow the rules. At this time, I'll ask the city clerk if there are any members of the public who would like to provide comments.
It does appear we have members of the public wanting to comment. We will go ahead and bring in user BG first.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. I meant to give my comments earlier on with the public comments, but I kind of walked outside for a minute and it was passed. So anyway, now I don't have a comment on all the budget things. Can I make a general comment at this time?
Only if it relates to the budget or the 10-year improvement plan that we just have been talking about.
Okay, so it's nothing, I don't know specifically, we talked about the parks. I have a question or a comment about the flow trail in Southern Lime Ridge, but that's not specifically, it's kind of,
That's
I'm
not
sure
really
it's
part of
budgeted
it.
somewhere.
That's not correct. That's not part of the 10-year capital improvement plan.
Okay, so I guess I'll wait till the next meeting to give my comment then.
Okay, thank you.
Mayor, I don't see any additional hands raised.
All right, so then we'll bring this back to council for any last or further comments, or if there's anything specific that staff needs from the council at this time. So I'll start with Mayor Pro Tem Francois.
Thank you. I want to just first respond to the member of the public, BG. Please feel free to email us before our next meeting in 2 weeks. And if you do it tonight, we'll even see your comments tonight. So it'll be part of the public record. And then in terms of the capital improvement plan, I have every confidence in our staff. I appreciate the hard work that went into this by Carlton and Steve and the team. And also I appreciate the input of all the commissioners that's reflected here. And so I don't have any further comments to add. Just want to applaud staff and thank everyone for the hard work.
Thank you. And good point about being able to email us so that we get this prior to the next 2 weeks for BG or anybody else. Let's go to Councilmember Haskew.
This is a long, complicated process, and Carlton, you made it as much fun as I've ever seen it be. The background has something to do with it, and the fact that you look like you're in a uniform besides. But there is a lot to be thoughtful about, and having seen the process, it does work. How you manage to get as much done as you have done in the 8 years I've been on council is just amazing. So thank you very much for your efforts at this. Thank you for your thoughtfulness. Thank you for being able to prioritize in most important, because I wouldn't know the difference between this project and the next one. Your expertise is really valuable to our community. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Councilmember Darling.
Same basic thing. My experience with infrastructure expenditure is that no money's available and then money will just show up. And if you're not ready, you're not going to get the money. So I appreciate all the work you guys have done into it. I appreciate the thought you've included on how to expand and contract the program as money becomes available, because if you don't dream it, it won't happen. So thanks, and keep dreaming.
Councilmember Silva.
Thank you very much, Mayor, and thank you to staff, Steve Waymeyer, Carlton Thompson, and the whole team for all of the work on this. I know this is a big lift every 2 years, particularly when we decide to do a 1 year and then shift the way we do it. The capital improvement program is thoughtful. It's reflective of what the community has provided input on through our commissions. It is important because it's flexible and adaptable, and it allows us to pivot based on changing needs and issues. And it has us ready should the opportunities and funding arise. As you bring it back to us in, I guess, within a month or so, it would be great to have the all-weather ball field actually in the sheets, because for some reason it slipped off the spreadsheet, because I believe there's a commitment of funding on that. And so maybe we should have it there. And also, if you could remember to compile a list of what we did scuttle in the last 2 years, because that doesn't happen very often, fortunately, where a pandemic hits and you have to set some projects aside so that we don't forget what we had intended to do, even if we don't have them programmed going forward. And thank you again.
Thank you. And I'll reiterate what my colleagues had said. Thank you very much. You know, a lot of work goes into this. It's, I think, my third time go around on seeing it and just being able to project into the future and trying to figure out how these funds will work with all these different projects and keeping the council priorities in mind as well. So appreciate that. Steve, thank you. Carlton, thank you. And the team, much appreciated for all of this hard work. And I believe you have what's needed from council on this one, Dan, if I read into it correctly.
Yeah, I mean, basic direction, I think at this point is fine. I think it was fairly clear and consistent. So next step would be Carlton, are you looking for formal motion on the 10-year? Otherwise, we'll bring the capital budget to council at our next budget update, and certainly for adoption before, obviously, the fiscal year begins.
Yeah, I wasn't looking for a formal anything on the 10-year right now. I have a few cleanup things to fix in there, as has been pointed out. So we'll do that, and I think we'll give the all-weather fields folks some time to figure out their fundraising.
Great. All right. Well, we're at 7:40 and we've been sitting straight down for an hour and 40 minutes. So why don't we take 10 minutes and reconvene at 7:50? Okay, we're back. Next on our agenda is the Downtown Next study session. And the city is evaluating what's next in efforts to support businesses and maintain the vibrant downtown atmosphere that makes Walnut Creek a regional destination. So staff, I know that you've got a report on this and looking for feedback from council.
Thank you, Mayor. Terry Kilgore, Assistant City Manager. I'm joined on camera by Mark Wardlaw, our Community Development Director. We've also got several key staff on the line ready to answer questions when we get to that portion of the evening's events. So this evening, I'm excited to be in front of you talking about the future, post-pandemic, post-COVID. We've been on an interesting journey, to say the least, with the rest of the world the last 14 months. And tonight we want to talk about what we want to do on a more permanent basis. Much of what you see that we've done in response to the pandemic was intentionally temporary. We were trying to dance around ever-changing health orders, building codes, fire codes, and the changing business restrictions as well. So while the pandemic necessitated creativity and innovation for our businesses to survive, the reality is we tried some things that worked really well and some things that maybe didn't go so great. Our focus was driven by the state of emergency, so it wasn't what we would really do. It wasn't a normal process. We didn't plan things. In fact, we asked this council for special exceptions to our normal protocols. We skipped planning commission, we skipped design review, we skipped transportation commission, all with a focus on staying nimble and responsive to the changing commissions. The deal was that the changes we made would be temporary, and we have done our very best to honor that agreement. So tonight we want to talk about, as rising vaccination rates are on our radar. It's hopeful that the health orders will ultimately be lifted here in the foreseeable future. It leads us to, of these things we've tried and things we considered but didn't try, what do we want to do in our downtown to make sure that we stay competitive and that we stay the destination of choice? Next slide, please. So this evening, we're going to talk a little bit about what we did, why we did it, some of the ideas we didn't pursue, and the overall journey that we've been on with a look ahead to the future. We'll talk about some of the opportunities and constraints embedded in each of these choices. We'll talk about some of our goals for the Downtown Next effort and share the results of a recent community survey that provided some really interesting feedback for us. And at the end, we'll leave lots of time for both public comment as well as council discussion and hopefully some guidance. Next slide, please. So I want to be clear that tonight we are not asking you for any decisions. This is really meant to be the beginning of the discussion. Our goal is to open the dialogue, to build a shared understanding of the opportunities, constraints, and even trade-offs based into each of the choices before us. It's okay if we leave this discussion not having answers. Your initial thoughts and comments are helpful to us as we look to winnow the myriad permutations that are currently in front of us. We'll talk about some specific items that we could choose to include or exclude from our final version. And hopefully we'll get feedback from you on things that you've liked about what we've tried, things you maybe didn't love, things we have to have for this to be successful in your opinion, things that maybe are just not feasible or non-starters, and ask if there's any new ideas that maybe we haven't explored that we really should be looking at. At later meetings, we'll start to hone in on a more specific path. And we'll come back to this slide at the end of our slide deck to remind us of what we're trying to get feedback on this evening. Next slide, please. So downtown, for the purpose of this dialogue and for the purpose of the survey, is defined by Civic Drive on the north, California on the west, Broadway on the east, and Newell to the south. I know there are many different definitions of downtown, but we sort of drew the lines that we thought made the most sense. Obviously, the discussion that we have tonight could head north on Locust Street a bit, could head west on Mount Diablo even. So we tried to frame this up to give people a frame of reference. Within this red, is that a trapezoid? I think it is. We have a great diversity of business types. And this doesn't even factor in all of the residents who now live within these boundaries as well. So keeping in mind that there's over 650 businesses represented, it's not surprising that when we ask questions, as you'll see in the survey responses, that we got a really diverse set of replies. What I would say to you is that I believe Walnut Creek is the premier downtown destination in the East Bay. And our challenge ahead of us is with the changing nature of retail, with more and more people working from home, we know some of the traditional patterns from consumers are likely to change. And so we want to make sure that we stay relevant, that we stay top of mind to people, and that when businesses are deciding where to locate, downtown Walnut Creek is their first choice. So while we've taken some hits in the pandemic, I have to tell you, it has not been as deeply shown in the vacancy numbers as we had anticipated. Our biggest vacancy numbers are actually amongst our large national retailers. Some of that is the result of restructurings and bankruptcies at a national level that we simply don't have control over. The good news is that while we're not out of the woods yet, our small restaurants and retailers are really showing their resilience. Since the pandemic began, we've had 8 closures, but we've actually had 15 openings or announcements of planned openings during the pandemic. I think that speaks to the strength of our brand. And in fact, we were talking to some brokers today who said they were looking for downtown spaces for small tenants. And as they were looking, things just kept coming off the available list. And so our small spaces are competitive, but we know that our small businesses are still challenged and still feeling the impacts. And so how we help them continue to thrive as we go forward is an important element. Downtowns, as you know, are complex places. Everybody's living in tight quarters. Businesses are coming at things with diverse viewpoints. And there are trade-offs where if you use space for one use, it may make it unavailable for other uses, including events or public art or some of the things that make our downtown charming. So we wanted to talk with you this evening about the options we see ahead, with the reality that downtowns don't have a one-size-fits-all solution available to them. That's proven by the diversity of downtowns, both in California and around the world even. You have to take into consideration the physical layouts, some of the unique constraints, and downtown Walnut Creek is no different. We're going to require a customized solution that fits with our physical environment, the needs of our businesses, and the vibe that we ultimately want to create in our downtown. So the opportunity before us is to thoughtfully choose a strategic path, and tonight is the beginning of that journey. Next slide, please. So the journey we've been on, if you remember back pre-COVID, that feels like a really long time ago if you're like me, we had very limited sidewalk dining. We had a few patios in some places, most on private property. Then the pandemic hit, and because of the health orders, we had to close down retail, restaurants, salons, fitness, office. And the first thing to come back was outdoor dining and outdoor retail. And so we quickly pivoted with this council support into how do we support those businesses. And the Rebound program was created. As I mentioned earlier, it temporarily allowed quite a lot of flexibility. But as we look ahead, it's tied to the end of the health orders. And so right now, staff is anticipating that that will wrap up near the end of August. I will note that there is some flexibility around that date. We've talked with the fire department, the building department, and some of the other practical constraints we had. We believe we've got some more flexibility. If we are not through this visioning process, we may be able to extend that date out a bit. So please don't let that be a huge constraint on your thinking. It is something that staff will keep an eye on as we roll forward. Next slide, please. So we didn't do this alone. Walnut Creek Downtown, the Chamber, Broadway Plaza, Regency centers, our downtown businesses and property owners, Contra Costa Fire and County Health have all been valuable partners. They've brought creativity to the table. They've helped us solve problems and given us just unprecedented flexibility. So many thanks to us, and we'll need them as we look at the journey ahead. Next slide, please. So to help frame things up, we've done this at sort of a 60,000 foot elevation to start. You know, this is really about the kind of front door experience that we want to create. Broadly, we framed this up that we can go back to what we were doing pre-pandemic, which means more parking, less outdoor dining. We could do something similar to what we're doing now with outdoor dining, some curbside pickup, some street closures, or we could try something completely new. And I know there's been some ideas kicked around, both amongst staff as well as our business community. And so to us, this is the philosophical framework that we're approaching this dialogue with is first and foremost, where do we want to fall on this spectrum? And you'll see this slide again later. Next slide, please. So with the changes we've made, we've created a new experience. And tonight we're focused on the public space, the streetscape, really what's our front door when people come downtown to visit their favorite eatery or retailer or salon. The words on the right represent different words we've heard people use to discuss what downtown is, or sometimes what they think downtown should be. And the choices we're going to work our way through in this Downtown Next process really should be informed by that vibe that we're trying to create. You know, we can't be all things to all people. And so being intentional in the environment and the experience that we're trying to create is really important. I want to highlight that I focused on the outdoor because what we're not talking about is changing zoning of business uses and some of those other planning oriented activities. This is really about the common spaces that we all share. Next slide, please. So on this journey, we've had 14 months to experience and to experiment. Some of the things we've tried are sidewalk dining. We've allowed additional parking areas on private property to be created into patios. Obviously, the most frequently visited right now is the outdoor dining in the public right-of-way. And by public right-of-way, we mean streets, sidewalks, alleyways, anything that's normally used for other purposes that's owned by the city. And then on the left, you can see we tried some street closures with different ideas of how to activate the area and bring some energy and things to do to the downtown. Next slide, please. Some of the other smaller things we've tried, we relaxed our standards on temporary signage. We've created more pickup zones, not just loading zones, but places people can pop in and pick up their meal real quickly. We've experimented with modular structures in partnership with WCD, who led the design of those. And this entire journey has been a partnership. So what the city brought to the table is that we didn't charge any permit or inspection fees for most of these activities. We didn't charge for the use of city parking or city lands. And in trade, what the businesses brought to the table were chairs, tables, tents, and actually, in some cases, these structures. So we tried to make it as cost efficient as we could. And I think we've seen some really creative ideas come out of our business community. Next slide, please. So as in anything, you have to make choices. And there's reasons that we chose the things we did, as well as the things that we didn't pursue. So our main driver was helping our businesses stay in business. And that meant flexibility around the changing health orders. It meant we needed to be able to implement quickly. We tried to minimize construction, knowing that drove costs and process. We tried to be flexible and pivot as things changed. We focused on being temporary. And then we also, where we could, tried to find places where the businesses could show some personality or showcase their branding to try and make things unique and interesting. The trade-off of the choices we made, the biggest impact was available parking. You know, anytime you bring tents or umbrellas or anything out into the right of way, it obviously impacts the visibility of the surrounding storefronts. In the beginning of the journey, that wasn't as big an impact. As more retailers and salons have reopened indoors, that's becoming a bigger and bigger concern. Some of our street closures obviously limited car circulation. Because we didn't charge, there were hits to the parking fund. A lot of people think parking is a big moneymaker for the city. We don't keep those monies. We reinvest them back in beautification and events and maintenance of the parking facilities. So when that fund takes a hit, our ability to really support the downtown also is impacted. The health orders restricted gatherings, but the reality is some of the changes we made, we knew would restrict parades and other event uses of the downtown. The parking spaces are where a lot of booths and or spectators are staged. So we knew that would be a challenge as we came back out of this. And then the trade-off of letting people be flexible as we ended up with some inconsistent design aesthetic. It looks temporary because it was meant to be temporary, but that may be something we want to consider longer term. Next slide, please. So throughout this journey, and I think following us on to the next phase of the journey, there's some concerns that are just ubiquitous. We are always keeping an eye on safety. That means car safety, pedestrian safety, bike safety. On the right, the photo is of our, so far, knock on wood, our only issue with a driver who crashed into one of the parklets. Overall, I'm happy to say that we've not really had the issues that were feared, and our drivers have been careful and paid attention to the fact that we have people out in these parklet zones. The equitable use of space has changed over time. When most businesses were closed, we really let our restaurants and retailers spill out into all the available space that we could. As more businesses reopen, there are growing concerns about how many spaces a given business should be able to occupy, what's a fair ratio, and who should be making those decisions. Fire and building codes always important to us. Most of the time here, we've snuck in under temporary structures, which gets us some great flexibility around tents and battening down the hatches and structural analysis. For whatever we choose to do next, we probably are not going to get those same exemptions, especially since the fire district got exceptionally creative and flexible for us during this pandemic period. And then cost is always something we're keeping an eye on. You'll see some cities have done really elaborate structures and programming of spaces. We could certainly consider that on a longer term basis, but in the short term, we were keeping a close eye on costs. Next screen, please. So in looking at what we also considered but did not pursue, we wanted to share with the council that we've been keeping a close eye on how other cities are utilizing their public space. And we wanted to give you a sense of why we considered some of these things but didn't pursue them. So the first one is one-way streets. By de facto, we have a few smaller side streets that are functioning as a one-way. That wasn't the design intent. In fact, most of these started out as closures of side streets, but to allow access to alleyways and parking lots and deliveries, we ended up only closing half the street. So that created a one-way street in some ways. The reason we didn't pursue it is that at the time it had limited support from the businesses. It required restriping and some other physical space changes that just, given the lack of business support, didn't make sense. So this is certainly one that could be reconsidered as we're looking at a more holistic program. Next slide, please. So full street closures, we did a couple of these, but they were really on the side streets. The pictures in front of you are of cities that really committed to this approach. They closed down full streets. That saves some of the worry about the interaction between cars and seated diners and pedestrians. It creates more space for wandering and for bikes. At the time, we did not pursue this because there were concerns about the impacts on curbside pickups and delivery, which during this pandemic have been crucial for many of our restaurants' survival. As we come back more to normal, it's clear that others have figured out how to make that model work. It is something we could certainly reconsider. Next slide. So tents and or modular structures, we did some of these. If you remember the journey, we did not start out with tents or modular structures. We began with just open air dining, in some cases umbrellas. That was to keep costs low, to get things up and running quickly, and to avoid some of the fire department inspections and permits that we knew we would have to ultimately get. Ultimately, as the weather changed and as the pandemic drug on, we knew we needed to come up with some other options. Heaters proved a challenge for a long time. Ultimately, the fire district helped us get creative on that. But I would note that different cities have different fire departments or different fire districts that they're working with. And the local fire marshal has a lot of say in what's allowed and what isn't. So, some people have quoted, so-and-so city got to do X and so city got to do Y. How come it's so different? That is part of the driving force. Some people have liked the diversity and personality of the different styles we have downtown. As I mentioned earlier, some people just don't like tents and or think that the way things have evolved looks a little hodgepodge. So that may be something as we go forward, we would want to address. Modular structures and pergolas on private property have proved more complicated. Right now, we only have 3 in place. Part of that has been the difficulty of navigating the building codes and making sure that the structural integrity is sufficient given the size and weight of those structures. That could be streamlined in the future. You can see in the bottom right corner, San Diego went all in and built some pretty significant structures and did some consistent design work. They're on a hill, so it's a little bit more massive probably than it would need to be here, but it gives you a sense of if things are unified, how different it can look and feel. Next slide, please. So one of the most popular refrains I think I heard from the pandemic is, why don't we have a European style plaza? So the practical matter is we don't have a plaza, which would require us finding somewhere to put one. But I think what people are really trying to say there is this kind of pedestrian oriented spill out into this space that has pavers and ambiance. And that could certainly be created in a full street closure type environment. It would require more capital investment. Right now, our streets are sloped to assist with stormwater runoff, which then brings ADA issues and other things that would have to be considered, but it's not impossible. It would simply be a much more capital oriented project than what we were able to undertake in the pandemic. Next slide, please. Another idea that's been floated about is using alleys. Commercial lane is our most popular suggestion. Other cities have done it. Maiden Lane in San Francisco is probably the most well-known local example. We discussed this idea with businesses, and what we found was there was great concern about access for deliveries, trash. There's some parking lots that you get to only through the alleyways. And then utility access is also in many places driven off of the alleys. And so this is something that could be examined in the future, but most of our businesses would need some time to adapt their operations as well as their space to make something like this feasible. It would also be a bit of a capital investment. Right now, our alleys are functional, not necessarily beautiful. So we would want to worry about the ambiance created as well. Next slide, please. As I mentioned, not all downtowns are the same. As we look ahead to factors that we need to consider in our decision making, one is the physical layout of our streets. We have very set north-south circulators throughout the core of our downtown. We have some side streets that are perhaps easier to close or to modify. But what you can see on the side is that there are many access points we would have to address as we look forward to options. The Blue dots show you accesses to parking garages. We've got 12 of those. The red dots are the alley and driveway access points. There's 51 of those. There's multiple parking lots within this space, and there's 12 bus stops as well as a shuttle circulator. So all of those things can be addressed, but it is part of the planning and the thinking that would need to go into our next steps. Additionally, the physical streets themselves are different widths. Some have bulb outs, some have planter areas, some have wide sidewalks, some have narrow sidewalks. And so there is some design work, as Carlton mentioned in the CIP. We know that some of our blocks we're going to need to do something with anyway, because we're going to have to do some construction around utilities. And so this may be an opportunity, if we set the design vision, to really start to build that out in a more physical space. You know, the other thing that we're always looking at is safety concerns. How do we address ADA, sight lines, temporary structures we mentioned already? And then the other thing that is not unique in our downtown, but is a limiting factor, is that our utilities run both in alleyways as well as in our street corridors. And so that's important, one, because we have to think about making sure our utilities have access to those for service as well as construction. And then it also limits in some locations where we can actually bolt into the pavement in a safe manner if we are going to build structures or other type of temporary things. Next slide, please. So a few more constraints for you to consider. You know, when we talk about businesses that didn't participate in Rebound, there were a variety of reasons. For many of them, it just didn't fit their business model. For some restaurants, having outdoor space, given their kitchen size, didn't make sense. Or their staffing model, sometimes they'd have to bring in a whole extra crew to make that tenable. But all businesses were part of the journey. And so we had some that were impacted who weren't benefiting from the use of parking and or public spaces. And that's been a growing discussion as we start to return more and more to normal, and our office tenants return, and our other types of businesses like fitness and salons are returning as well. Visibility is always important. We talked about that one. Side streets, you know, what we do on side streets impacts how the main streets flow, like Main and Locust, and what we do on Main and Locust impacts the side streets. And, you know, that we heard often from side street tenants, hey, don't forget about us. We're part of the downtown too. So one of the ubiquitous fire district requirements that really isn't changeable, we've tried, we can certainly try again, but they've been consistent over time, is that there's a necessary 20-foot minimum clearance for emergency vehicle access. And so eventually when we get to looking at street cross sections, you'll see that combined with our physical street layout limits some of the options available to us. And then throughout this journey, flammability has been an issue. You know, the fire department's gotten creative and let us put things that they normally wouldn't. But if we're going to be moving into a more permanent condition, making sure we've got separation and the right kinds of materials is going to be important. No one wants to accidentally burn the downtown down. So we talked about events. And then throughout this, we've got just the practical matters of life. Where do you put your trash? Where do you take your deliveries? Where do you put your stuff and your storage? And then looking at our pedestrian safety, as well as bikes. That's one thing we should have included on this list, is a large number of our survey respondents talked about how they'd like to ride their bike downtown more, but there's not a lot of places to do that or to store your bikes. And then physical distancing, hopefully ultimately goes away. We know it will likely be with us for a while. So there may be a bridge strategy here that we need to think about as well. Next slide, please. So we talked about the constraints, but to me, what's more exciting are the opportunities. You know, downtown has evolved over time. We mostly had businesses stay in their privately owned spaces that they leased. And then we created a beautiful streetscape, but it's also not as activated as it possibly could be. And we tested that theory with the pandemic. Having businesses spill out onto the sidewalks and into the public spaces creates an energy. Some people like it, some people don't. But this moment in time, we have an opportunity to discuss, do we like it? Do we not? And through this journey, we're hoping to build engagement with the business community. We look for this to be a collaborative process between the community, the council, staff, and our businesses to figure out what the best fit is, all with the intent of enhancing the downtown environment and experience. Through this journey of Rebound, we've gotten really creative with our problem solving, and we've streamlined processes. We think there's more that could be done in that space, depending on which options we ultimately select. Next slide, please. So, as we begin this journey, these are some of the goals we've set for ourselves. We'd appreciate at some point, it doesn't have to be this evening, council's input on if these goals make sense. To us, the primary is to make downtown the destination of choice, to help our businesses, and to find a way to figure out how to activate public and use public space in a way that's equitable and energizing for the downtown. So next slide, not next space, sorry. So as we came into this journey, we had some questions for the community. What we knew is that what was happening in 2019 was not exactly what we were likely to experience on the other side of the pandemic. Some people have taken to buying more online, although our consultants are telling us not nearly at the rate of change we had anticipated. But we knew that people would be using downtown slightly differently. And so, especially since they had a chance to experience it differently. So we put out a survey that was entirely focused on how people thought they would come back to downtown. What do they see themselves doing post-pandemic when they don't have to worry as much about social distancing and work from home and all of that. So we had 418 individual responders to the survey. Our partners helped us get the word out, as well as we blasted out through our normal city channels. Next slide, please. So a few of the results. Here's your display of how many people responded by age group. I would say that to me, the response is skewed younger than I expected, but I feel like we got a really nice distribution across the different age groups. Next slide, please. So these next two questions, or this next first question, wherever you see an asterisk, that's where people had the opportunity to select more than one. So that's why when you add them all up, it's more than 100% because people could choose multiples. So the exciting thing is that we got good representation from our residents. We had less representation from our non-residents and our downtown residents than I would have hoped. But we did get a good showing of property owners and business owners when you look at them as a percent of total respondents. If you're a business property owner, our office tenants showed up in force, which was exciting to see. They've been a little quiet on this journey, but it looks like they're starting to come back to the office. And then our industries that we would expect stepped up and responded, including our restaurant bar owners, our retailers, and our salons. Next slide, please. Overall, we got positive response from those who have dined outdoors in one of our dining spaces. 67% said they enjoyed the experience, 10% were somewhat, and then 21% were the people who had not yet dined in an outdoor space. So of those who tried it, most people enjoyed it. Next slide, please. So this is where we ask about their intentions on how they will both use the downtown, how they'll get there, and where they'll go when they get here. The vast majority of people visit, and most drive their own vehicle. They might walk or bike. I was a little surprised at how low the rideshare numbers were, honestly, given how much people have been talking about that. And then where are you going to go when you go downtown? Almost everyone is headed to a restaurant, bar, and a shopping destination here in post-COVID time. And then it looks like many of them are going to be combining it with visits to arts, entertainment, salons, and/or fitness. So it really is a multi-use downtown. And I think we need to make sure we remember that as we design forward. Next slide, please. So this question is asking, of the things we tried, which things did you want to see continue or not? And what this shows is that all of the elements we tried had majority support during the pandemic, and people want to see it continue. So slightly lower support for items that impacted parking, but we were still well over 2/3. As this council knows, 2/3 is hard to reach when you're surveying. So these are exciting numbers. Street closures have more support when we're talking about using them for outdoor dining, not just recreational activities, which was interesting to me, although there still was majority support. Next slide, please. So we're back to the choices ahead of us. We can go back to what we were doing pre-pandemic, roll all this back. We've been very clear with our businesses the entire journey that everything we're doing is temporary, temporary, temporary. We could keep a similar format. We'd have to come up with some enabling actions to make that possible after the health orders and emergency orders are rescinded, but it's doable. Or we could do something entirely new. And as we've discussed, many of our choices were driven by trying to be speedy, avoiding construction, and being temporary in nature. As we look to the future, more things are possible than what we have tried out specifically. Next slide. So some elements to keep in mind as you look ahead, outdoor dining in public areas, in private areas. You know, there's discussion around should some of these changes be seasonal versus permanent. I will tell you what I saw on the journey is that most of our restaurants said, you know, the more permanent it is, the more helpful it is. Dragging out tables and chairs every weekend or every evening wasn't something that got a lot of enthusiasm, but we would certainly want to pull and dig in on that a little bit more deeply. Tents and modular structures. We have citywide, and you'll remember we opened up the Rebound program citywide. We have 71 total outdoor dining locations, 65 of which are downtown. So when businesses are saying, why is this discussion focused on downtown? It's because it's been the heavier user of these program elements. 40 of those are occurring in city parking spaces. So right now we're using about 114 parking spaces. And so we've assumed that number of parking spaces when we did the financial estimates for you of cost impacts to the parking fund should we continue. There's always obviously the option of charging for use of those spaces to mitigate some or all of that cost. We can look at street changes, we can look at impacts on events, and then we should also make sure we meant to include obviously bike facilities and public art as other considerations here as well as we go forward on this journey. Next slide. So what I would ask both this council and our community to consider is what experience we want to create in the downtown. And as we think about what we want to create, I think we have some good examples of things we've tried. And so what things might we want to continue? What things might we not want to continue? And are there other ideas that should be explored before we move into decision making? Nice slide. Next slide, please. So again, this evening, we're focused on general feedback. We don't expect the council to have, 100% answer formulated for us this evening. We don't even expect a 5% answer. If you have it, great. But really for us, any feedback is helpful on this journey, even if it's just at that 60,000 foot level we discussed. Because what it does is it helps us winnow the various possible options and permutations. So, as we look forward, your likes, your dislikes, your must-haves, your non-starters, your new ideas. We'd love to hear all of those things this evening or in the coming days after you've had time to reflect on our discussion. So next slide, please. So I'll close before we go back to the mayor to start public comment with a highlight of where we see us going next. So based on the feedback we get this evening, we'll come back with some more detailed options, some more research, some more thinking of what possible options are before us. We'll spend some more time defining criteria for decision-making. Every choice we have in front of us has a trade-off associated with it. So we're going to have to balance the needs of is that a Star Wars quote? To balance the needs of the many for the good of the few. No, I have that backwards. It's Star Trek. The good of the many over the good of the few. And then obviously with whatever option we select, we're going to have some council actions that are needed. We'll have to modify code potentially. We'll have to define what appropriate level of review is for some of these, who should be doing the review. Ultimately, I foresee an outdoor dining policy that memorializes this all in an easy to access guide for our businesses who might be interested in outdoor dining. And then if there are physical capital changes, we may need to talk about funding and baking ourselves into the CIP effectively to make those things possible. So with that, I thank you very much for your time and attention, and I will conclude my presentation, Mayor.
Thank you, Terry. So I want to do this a little bit differently right now. If anybody has any burning questions, ask right now, then raise your hand. Otherwise, I'd like to go to public comment if there's anybody from the public that would like to make comment on this before we actually have our own discussion. So so just raise your hand on the council if you have a burning question to ask right now. Okay, then we'll go to public comment first, and then we'll come back with any questions or discussion. So Susie, if you could bring in a member of the public.
Sure, we have Kathy Hemingway up first.
All right. Hi, Kathy.
Good evening. Hi. I just wanted to speak on behalf of Walnut Creek Downtown today. My name is Kathy Hemingway. I'm the Executive Director of Walnut Creek Downtown. And on behalf of our association and its 650 business community, first of all, we'd like to thank the council, city staff, and all of the stakeholders that really stepped up and sometimes out of the box to create the Rebound program. This program provided immediate recovery efforts to the downtown businesses soon after the pandemic began. And while there were many lessons learned along the way through a variety of ups and downs, in general, this really proved to be a widely successful program. And we look forward to continuing to partner with the city and our other community stakeholders to move in a positive direction, finally being able to also act proactively versus reactively. So I'd like to just share a couple of comments after Terry's our staff report that wanted to give you our observations and look forward to continued dialogue on this topic. One is being the one-way streets, that those would need to be carefully considered. Do they actually increase speeds or do they provide a traffic calming effect? This is a concern that we already have, as there's a little bit of an issue with Thursday through Sunday nights with cars revving their engines and speeding and trying to create, on the flip side, trying to create a dining experience that's enjoyable. The idea of the seasonal option may not be financially feasible for some of the downtown businesses, mainly due to storage costs and removal costs. And also the logistics of bringing the tables and chairs back and forth. They also may hinder this may also hinder some new businesses from moving into the downtown who are also could be concerned about these additional logistics and expenses. The topic of equity, one consideration is to redesign the outdoor display in Walnut Creek downtown and the city to possibly enhance this program for our retailers who most likely won't take advantage of the pop-ups due to additional staffing to help manage and oversee the merchandise in their pop-up space. The enforcement also has been an ongoing challenge as the state and the county have provided guidelines, yet not always offering to assist with the enforcement. This might be an opportunity for us to consider building in a clean and safe program into whatever programming we design and create in the future to help manage and enforce some of the guidelines. And with that, I think I'll wrap up and defer any extra time left over from my comments to Brian Hirahara, who's also going to speak tonight. Thank you.
Right. As we bring Brian in, thank you, Kathy. I was amiss in not giving people a heads up regarding the public comments. So please raise your hand or press *9 if you're connected by audio if you'd like to provide a public comment. And each speaker will have 2 minutes to make their oral remarks. Of course, with Walnut Creek Downtown or groups, you'll be able to have the 10 minutes, and that's what Brian will be taking the remainder of right now. Written comments submitted have been and will during this item be posted to the city's website for public review and are included in the meeting record, but will not be separately read into the record. So with that.
Excuse me, Mayor.
Yes.
There was about 2 sentences of what Kathy said that sounded important, but I couldn't understand what she said. Something was garbled, and it was in the equity. Can she come back and read it, or does Brian have her notes and he can read it? And we don't need to take her time. It was a technical issue. It was the equity point.
Yes, it was in regards to the retailers. So let's see. One consideration would be to consider redesigning the outdoor display agreement that Walnut Creek Downtown has with the city. And so maybe we could enhance that program that would make it more attractive to the retailers and more helpful to them to be able to display outdoor in front of their businesses. And as the retailers, they don't really take advantage of the pop-ups as much, mainly due to the logistics of having to oversee their merchandise that's out in front of the business.
Thank you. I have to tell you, at our end, I heard the outdoor display, and I thought you wanted us to build something. You just want us to change an agreement. So, okay, thank you.
More building. If I might just add 2 more things that real quickly.
She has to run the clock if she does.
Okay. Thanks, Susie. One other item was that I hope that additional outreach will be conducted to find out exactly how many businesses we're talking about that would be interested in the pop-up situation. Are we talking about 10 or are we talking about all 40? I think that will be an important factor to determine. And then finally, the consideration of extending the outdoor dining and the retail pop-up permits through the winter of 2022. So businesses can continue to try to recover from the past year. And in general, we believe that most of the businesses would be open to paying rent for that pop-up space after a certain time period, maybe as the winter begins. So that's it. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Kathy.
Thank you for sharing your time, Kathy. Brian Hirahara, BH Development, resident downtown, business owner, property owner, developer, and on Walnut Creek Downtown. As Kathy mentioned, just want to thank staff. Terry, as our fearless leader, I've been fortunate to be on the Rebound Retail Restaurant Subcommittee, and it's been amazing and an honor to serve on it. They've moved mountains. Walnut Creek has not had a reputation for moving fast. They have a reputation for being very thorough, but they were thorough and fast, and they really saved our businesses. So it's a big thanks from all of downtown. Also, the silver lining of the pandemic is it really forced us to do a lot of things. that we had not considered before. So I'm actually really excited because we've had to recreate, pivot, and do things that we never would have considered. We've created this European environment, and I think that's what we all crave. We all want to feel like we're escaping the suburbs of somewhere else. And the surveys really supported that. And I just want to take a step back and say that really, my mantra that you probably all heard before is that once the pandemic is over, and Terry alluded to this, we still have the record vacancies, hard corner locations. I think there's 7 of them. Some of them being leased, which is great. And we have good, strong fundamentals. But the whole e-commerce, Amazon effect hit our downtown very hard, along with all the bankruptcies, hit right after Broadway Plaza, in the process, completed a 300,000 square foot retail expansion and restaurant. And so for the first time in the 25 years I've been involved in downtown, all of a sudden, instead of having an undersupply and over demand, it flipped around. So all of a sudden we have limited retailers and a lot of vacant space. An example of that is Apple was our tenant for 15 years. And it's the only time we've ever lost a tenant because they did too well. They tripled their size and went right across the street, prime location. We're going on 3 years. We are on the 1 yard line, fingers crossed, to lease that space. Prior years, we would have had multiple offers. It will have been 3.5 years. And it's just an indication of how difficult retail is. And going forward, I think when we're out of the pandemic, a lot of this should be focused on retail. We become known more as a destination of dining than retail to a certain extent. Yes, we still have great retail, but we are going to be struggling going forward. So I think that's why a lot of this focus is on retail. Speaking of European, I think retail, a lot of the articles and studies and all what retailers are doing, they're all pivoting to experiential retail. So I think that's what we're seeing in a lot of the programs that have been very successful. Again, wanting the European vibe and really things that you can't do on the internet. Now you can get DoorDash on top of, boxes ending up on your doorstep. You see Instacart people at Whole Foods or everywhere you go. And then on top of the Amazon effect. So what can you not do in your home on the internet? It's outdoor dining. It's the arts and the mural art programs and murals that we've done, visual things, that European environment, beautification, live music, events, putters, all great things that get people out of their houses and into the downtown, and then drive foot traffic into the downtown and help those retailers. And I think, as Kathy mentioned, the outdoor display program is another, to loosen those restrictions is another way, a great way of capitalizing on that foot traffic and getting them in stores. Another thing that we found was that some of our small retail merchants on Main Street, as I move into outdoor dining, literally when there was only takeout, they had 0 customers come into their stores for 2 or 3 days a week, 0. So obviously they had no sales. So without that activation and that activity, it was really a ghost town downtown. Moving to outdoor dining, and Kathy covered a lot of it, but I'm in favor of permanent instead of seasonal, again, because of the logistics of the temporary. And we found that when we did the modular structures, that there were far fewer. So I don't think we're talking nearly 100 parking stalls. I think it'd be much less. And then, if you have the cost plus renting them, and also I think it'll reduce the number, but also I think then you could have more robust structures that are safer, that are more attractive, and you can locate them strategically within blocks to activate them. Downtown Livermore is a pioneer, and they did this several years ago, maybe 15 years ago, and they've been very successful. So I think that is a very positive way of approaching it with permanent. And also, I'm in favor of at least studying one-way streets. If it allows more real estate, more space to have these structures and take away fewer parking stalls, then I think the inconvenience would be worth it. So I could say a lot more, but again, I'm just very thankful and more excited than I've been in a long time that we're working on things, we're partnering together, we're moving forward and being creative. So again, thank you to staff, to the city council for all their support. And I am at the table to help as much as I can. Thank you.
Thank you, Brian.
Thank you.
Susie, is there anybody else that wants to speak?
Mayor, I don't see any additional hands raised.
Okay, so we'll close the public comment for this and we'll bring it back to council for discussion. So Terry, I think we're going to need some help on direction for this, because I have a feeling that if on a free form, we'll have 5 people going off in a variety of different directions here. So perhaps if you want to guide maybe item by item, how you would like to help to see some direction, maybe that'll help give a good framework.
Sure, I'd be happy to. If I could ask Amy or Susie to bring up slide 28, I'd appreciate it. The kind of the big framing here, as I mentioned, is really around, do we want to go back to pre-pandemic conditions, limit outdoor dining, kind of send businesses back into their leased space, free up more parking? Do we want to, I think you had the right slide with the one with the road, slide 28, I believe, sorry. Do we want to keep a similar format? Obviously, as was mentioned, we'd have to do some standardizing. Maybe not all businesses would be interested, but we could keep something similar to what we're doing now. Or do we just broadly want to do something else? And if you would go to the next slide, you know, that the elements where we've got some decision points are shared on this slide in terms of if outdoor dining is a yes, that we want to continue, do we want it in these public areas? Do we want to continue to allow it in the private areas? Is it seasonal or permanent? Do we want tents? Do we want to charge for the space? And then do we want to look at bigger at street changes to potentially, as Brian mentioned, free up some more space and facilitate that, knowing that it has impacts on events, and that you know, we might also want to be keeping an eye towards bikes and pedestrian uses as well. So I would start with the 60,000 foot look of outdoor dining, or go back to what we had, and then start to winnow things from there.
Can you go back to the road, the fork in the road question? Because if that's what you want us to answer
Right.
first.
Okay,
So
let's start there.
Yeah, so let's do this, and we'll try to go through quickly, and if council can make as brief a comments as possible on this, because we'll go through about 5 or 6 of these, and then we can have more of a free form at the end to summarize. So let's just quickly go through. And the first question is, would you prefer to do something new, keep it as it is currently, or as it was prior to the pandemic? And let's start with Cindy, who's on the rebound committee with me.
So thank you, first of all, to everyone, including all of those working with the downtown businesses, our businesses across the community, the Chamber of Commerce, Walnut Creek Downtown. So my answer to this question may be a little convoluted, because I'm not sure between options 2 and 3 where I land when I say this. I know I'm not returned to pre-pandemic. We have a wonderful opportunity to capitalize on what we've learned and move forward. And we knew we had to. What happened over the last 10 months is we had 10 years worth of change in the way the economy works, and we need to really keep going. I'm not sure if I'm going straight ahead or doing something new, but I'll say it this way: keep the best and fix the rest.
Okay, thank you. Let's go on to Cindy Darling.
Okay, I look at this as, I don't want to go back to where we were pre-pandemic, because as Brian Harahara mentioned, we already had challenges. We already had vacancies. We already had competition from neighboring cities. We already had Amazon. So what I see is more of a phase in, keep going with what we've got through a reasonable period of time, and then start to head towards doing something new. I think we don't know right now how restaurants, are all outdoor dining restaurants going to be successful in the long term? Let's give them some time to test it out as they go forward and then see if they really want to go to a bigger structure. So I'm like heading down the middle of the road and then veering off to the left as we learn more.
Okay, thank you. Luella.
Thank you. Thank you for all these thoughtful questions. I'm fully in agreement with not returning to pre-pandemic. That was based on an economy that started in the 50s and hung in tight until the end of the 20th century, but the world is a different place. Having been on the rebound committee and struggling over things like competing bands at different restaurants, my music's better and louder than yours. I mean, I can see problems happening, but we were going to have to do something no matter what, because the world has changed. I am desperately trying to put my finger on what it is that attracts people. It has to be more than just the feeling that you're going to come to a place and lose your money. You're either going to buy something or your whole purpose downtown is to separate from your money. I think we have to do a little bit more in terms of giving choices about what people will be attracted to, what works for families, what works for young adults, what works for older people. Actually, Brian is a really good example because his proposed food court was going to have some of everything in it. And I think we can step back and look at that and see what made our heart tick on that one and see how we can make that work for the whole town. City, we're a city.
Okay, thank you. And Matt.
I'm in general agreement with my colleagues. I think for me, for this year, for 2021, I would say keep a similar format. And then in starting next year, look at doing something new. I think some of the things that need improvement over what we're doing now are curbside pickup, the aesthetics of some of the outdoor structures, the location of some of the outdoor structures. And obviously what I was intrigued by is the survey results that 91% of people are driving downtown. So the parking spaces are valuable for the people that are driving downtown and also for our revenue purposes. There's a balancing act, I think, that needs to happen, but I'm acutely aware that this is another challenging year. And so I would keep going down the road we're going this year and then look at doing something new in the future.
Thank you. And for me and Terry and staff, thank you for all the work that you've done on this. I know this is just a constant heavy lift every single day that we're working with the businesses as well as getting all of this taken care of. And thank you for the presentation. For this, looking at this slide, I would say keeping mostly similar to what we're currently doing. I mean, this is all still new to us. And so to say try something new, I mean, this is still new. We're just sort of getting our arms around it. So my preference would be keep what we're currently doing. There will be some modifications. And I think on the next slide that we go through, we'll hear about some of those modifications. But we are in a new paradigm, and right now it's helping a lot of those businesses to survive. And then by keeping this going, they will be able to thrive. And so that's the way I look at this. And from everything that I've heard of from residents love this. I've heard almost nothing but positive reviews from the people that visit downtown. The businesses, at least on the restaurants case, thoroughly appreciated. This has kept them going, absolutely for sure. So that's the way I look at this. So with that, let's go to the next slide because there were some specifics there that might help you also get some direction on this. So for this question that we'll pose to council, for outdoor dining, looking at that top left area, should these be in all three of the public areas or in one or two of them, and just thoughts about where they should be. And then looking at the private areas, so we'll look at these two together. Where on the private areas do we feel they should be? So let's, this time we'll start with Luella.
I'm thinking about crowding, because, and I remember there was one really upset constituent out there who was really upset that he couldn't walk down the sidewalk because people were carrying food in front of him. And he analogized it to being a war zone. So there were some complaints. I'm reluctant to give up sidewalks without having something to replace them. Maybe turning sidewalks into places where we eat, and then taking our pedestrian areas out into what were streets. I don't know the technicalities of all of it. It seems to be working, but it also, the ones that worked were the ones that were very thoughtful. The group of restaurants that got together and shared all of the building, and it looked cohesive and it fit. We have short buildings in downtown, and sometimes I'm concerned about the proportions of the outdoor dining versus the aesthetics of the buildings. Parking lots and breezeways are fine. We need to keep our alleys available because they are so utilitarian until we find a different way to handle things.
Thank you. Let's go to Cindy Darling.
Okay,
Mayor,
so
can I just jump in real quickly? Certainly, if your council wants to work through all of these, we can. There was another slide that was a little broader if there was feedback you wanted to focus on as well. So maybe if we could toggle to that one and then back to this one to decide which way you'd want to go if there are some more general questions before we start getting into real specifics about breezeways and landscape areas and that sort of thing.
It's one more forward, Susie, and my apologies. That was the intent and I forgot that.
okay, you want me to do likes and dislikes?
Okay, sure. Let's, yeah.
Okay, so I think everybody pretty much agrees they like the idea of the outdoor dining, they like the eclectic, they like the European feel to it, but one person's eclectic is another person's disheveled. And so we need to keep our eye on that. I think the dislikes, the only dislike I really have is the disheveled, but there's some concerns I have. One is very clearly safety. You know, we dodged a bullet with the mid-afternoon drive through Crepes Ooh La La, and we need to keep our eye on that as we go forward. And then, so must-haves would be the dining. Non-starters for me would be back probably 10 years ago when we were having problems with bar violence downtown. As we go forward with this in a transitional over the next year, we need to keep our eye on cocktails to go, people staying out late at night as we all get vaccinated and we all can hang out together. We want to do that, but we need to not get to a point where we start to have disruptive behavior downtown again. So the things that, new things to explore really are, I really would like to look at one way. I think it would give us an opportunity to marry the safety of having a bollard type situation with continuing the outdoor dining and giving the space for people to drive. I would like to look for social opportunities that weren't possible during COVID. I think there was a lot that we can do as we move forward, as we can change the rules and, you know, get people together outside, do more arts, do more interactive things. On the parking side of things, it would be useful to look at whether or not you can set up, if you have one or two streets with a lot of restaurants on it, have a shuttle that runs back and forth, you know, a golf cart or something like that, help the people that are less mobile get to that. And I'm running out of things. Anyway, I might come back, but
Okay, thank you.
my first start.
All right, let's go to Matt. Next.
Okay, so I sort of touched on some of my likes and dislikes previously, but one thing that I really have liked about the outdoor dining is the vibrancy, this sense of energy and activity it's provided to downtown in a very difficult time frame. So I think that's been a real positive. And I think some of the dislikes were touched on by some of the speakers too, especially on the equity side, and how do we really help maybe more of our struggling retailers. We've certainly helped the restaurants, and that was needed, but not focus just on one group, but try to lift all the boats. The tide needs to lift all the boats there. I don't like the loss of parking and the loss of revenue throughout all of downtown. So I'd like us to be, I think Mr. Hirahara mentioned, or maybe it was Ms. Hemingway, how many restaurants really want to take advantage of this going forward, and being strategic about, where that's going to be located. And one other dislike is some of the structure. There's no uniformity in the aesthetics on some of the structures. That's fine for this year, but on a going forward and a permanent basis, I'd like to see something that looks more befitting of our downtown and has a little nicer polished look to it. And again, going forward too, I think they'll have, for the restaurants that want to take advantage of this, I think there will need to be some sort of compensation to the city for the loss of the parking spaces. Where I've noticed that it seems to work well is on Bonanza and Lincoln in particular. I think on those side streets, they seem natural for outdoor dining. And I don't really have any must-haves or non-starters, but I think it's exciting. I think we have a lot to work with here. We have a great downtown to begin with, so this is just making it even better.
Thank you, Matt. Luell, I see your hand raised. Before I go to Cindy Darling or Cindy Silva, do you have a quick question or comment?
I have a comment, and the comment is we also need to remember that downtown is also becoming a significant residence area, and we have to figure out how what happens on the street doesn't impact the residents that are living in the multi-use buildings.
Okay, thank you. Okay, Cindy Silva.
Likes, dislikes, must-haves, non-starters, new things to explore. Okay, let me see if I can get it sorted correctly. I think the outdoor experience that we created has been essential to continue. I think it's experiential, not transactional. So dining is experiential. Going and buying a pair of shoes or getting your shoes repaired is more transactional. So I think there is a difference between those. If you talk about a European experience, the dining is what draws people, and the entertainment they might have, music, art, and that draws and helps support those retailers that are also located nearby. And I appreciate what WCD said about maybe looking at our outdoor retail agreement. I think, so that's entertainment, dining, experiential, European, outdoor. I think what I've liked is that we have done this on a streamlined basis. And I think we have to figure out a way to do that. We've learned how to do it. I think we have to avoid going back to slow and methodical. We have to find a way to balance the desire to be the turtle or the tortoise versus the hare. And one parade, we only have one parade in Walnut Creek. And I think we could find another place to have the parade and not let one parade affect everything. I think the use of parking outdoors the public right-of-way parking spaces has been good. I think we, like Matt said, we need to be strategic about it, both in location and how many are allocated. I think we charge for it because that will help create a commitment to it. The public right-of-way doesn't have to be free in a non-pandemic environment. And that will also help get more commitment to it because it's not everybody just throwing tables and chairs out every day of the week. What I have disliked is a bit of the, as Cindy Darling said, the haphazard, or I will liken it to a range of quality. It's not that we want cookie cutter or everything to look the same. We just need it to look like it's all safe and all inviting and easy and accessible. I can see and understand that if every sidewalk were available, then you wouldn't be able to pass on the street. And so you have to consider that. I am not a fan of trying to repurpose alleyways because that just puts those trucks back on our streets. I mean, we got to pick one or the other. We've got to be able to get to the doors of those businesses. I appreciate what Luella said about noise interactions. And I think the greatest number of noise interactions that have occurred is because our bar hours are outside now. I don't think bars are outdoor dining. I think bars need to be contained in order to manage noise and the issues related to them. And long range, let's see, fee for space, equity doesn't mean everyone it doesn't mean it has to be for all and everybody has to have it. Everybody has to have a chance, not necessarily everybody has to have a space. I think we need to rethink what can be put in our downtown storefronts in that red box. There may be some other things that we're going to need to allow to happen. San Francisco is doing flexible retail zoning, and it didn't require them to rewrite the whole code or redo zoning amendments, et cetera. They created a new zoning category, and it's worth looking at. And I think we have to remember the symbiosis between our downtown residents, who this is their front door, and this is a good thing, and our downtown offices. This is what brings in lunch traffic. And then the commercial district. All has to work together, and it creates not just a downtown district, it creates a new type of district. And then I am willing to consider changing the streets, whether it's some closed with the center aisle open like State Street in Santa Barbara, which I did visit 6 weeks ago and walked it, or if it's one-way streets. But I caution that the side streets work more to move traffic between Broadway and California than Main and Locust. And that's why places like Santa Barbara basically have closed State Street and kept those side streets moving to get at the alleyways. I talked fast.
Thank you. All right, so for me, again, I think the Euro dining, that's absolutely alike, and what we can do to help to encourage that and work with those businesses, it sounds like with everybody as well. I really like that. I think we should be keeping that. On the dislikes, I think that while I don't mind the variety of haphazard, the way that the restaurants have decided their outdoor dining facilities look, let me rephrase that. I don't mind that it looks different, because I think that all of these different restaurants, there's a lot of different types of restaurants. They all have a unique ambiance with their outdoor. However, there should be something with at least a minimum standard, so that you don't have like basically a bridge table with a couple of folding metal chairs on one next to one that looks like this has always been there. So I think there does have to be some kind of a base standard, but I don't need them all to look uniform. I don't like the fact when, and my wife and I have dined outdoors I want to say 20, 25, maybe more times than that. And the part that's always a little frustrating, especially on the weekend, is you're sitting right next to the street. Of course, you're on the street. It can get noisy. There can be a lot of exhaust. There are cars that are revving up that are trying to be the center of attention, I suppose. And obviously there's a safety factor as well. And so that's something that needs to be addressed, and I'll actually address that in a minute with the new things to explore. I also, I want to make sure that the businesses are all working together with each other. And so one of the dislikes has been that if a restaurant or or other types of business is taking more of the space than has been allotted to them, we need to work that out, because everybody has to work together in this, whether it's retail next to restaurants or office space next to restaurants and retail. And so the city really does need to make sure that what's allotted is allowed, and what the businesses are then doing in that space is allowed. And I certainly feel that there does need to be a charge on using those parking spaces. This is the public right of way. We are losing, I think the last count I heard was $250,000 to date. And actually, that money also goes to paying for the free trolley downtown. So we talk about beautification and different events, but it goes to the trolley. And so this is money that it's gone forever. And that's okay, because we needed to do something to make sure that these restaurants and businesses survived. But moving forward, I think there does have to be a cost in there. And I don't know whether that cost is to make up for the difference of what the parking meters would charge, or maybe there's a charge in there that there is a convenience sake that has now been lost to those people that would normally use the parking spaces. So that does have to be figured out. And also working together, as I've heard from a couple of my colleagues, that the office buildings, they have to realize that these restaurants are bringing in business, but the new residences, and it's primarily the new residences that are downtown, also have to realize that some of these businesses have been there for a long time. And while we do have noise ordinances, when people move downtown, they also have to understand that they are moving into an urban arena, and there is urban activity, and there is sirens, and there are loud cars, and there will be music that comes even from the insides of some of the restaurants until, and I don't know what the noise ordinance is, but I believe it's until like 10:30 or 11 o'clock on a Friday or Saturday night. And obviously these businesses have to adhere to our noise ordinances, but the residents also have to realize that this is a vibrant and different downtown than perhaps when they checked out their apartment on a Wednesday afternoon and said, what a nice little town. Yes, it is, but it's also very different on a Friday or Saturday night.
During the pandemic.
What? Well, and especially during pandemic, if obviously, yes, if somebody came in last April, it's very different. And that then feeds into the new things to explore. And part of the challenge on the Friday and Saturday nights, I think, is that you do have the traffic right there. And so what I would like to explore is shutting down Main and Locust streets on Friday or Saturday nights, Friday and Saturday nights after 6 p.m. once the retail businesses close, so it doesn't impede their business. I'm not as big a fan of the one-way streets. In fact, most of the residents that I've spoken to aren't in favor, and I brought this up a lot over the last couple of months, and almost none of the businesses are. And I'm very unsure myself. And so if we go in that direction and have it, we've invested all those changes, and we can't just turn a dime and revert back if we don't like it after a month. So I would like to see us do something like just block Main and Locust Street so that people can get into the garages. The alleys, I think, do need to remain open for deliveries, for pickups, for people being able to use those alleyways. And another fear I have is if we have one way in each direction, suddenly those alleyways become more roads and thoroughfares of people trying to get from one side to the other without having to go all the way around the back of the queue. So I would like to explore that as a Friday and Saturday closure opportunity. And obviously there's a lot more discussion that has to go around that. So a lot of information there, Dan and Terry. And I don't know if we need to go back to that, toggle back to that other slide just to make sure that we covered some of the specifics that you were looking to. I think we.
No.
You're good?
Mayor, if I could, I feel like you all did a great job of covering things. The one thing I would ask is if Councilmember Haskew had anything on her likes, dislikes we didn't get to, just because I I got her off on the wrong slide. I apologize for that.
Yep, that's fine. Luella?
And, no, I agree with pretty much everything that everybody else said. I like the energy. It may not stay as much as it is now because of the change and the coming out from COVID and people getting a chance to see their friends and again, it may be far more exciting and energetic on the phone. But we also have the plaza in front of the theater that we shouldn't ignore. And we also have in the North Downtown Specific Plan, Giamona, that may be a place to start to think about alternatives. It doesn't have to be in that hardcore section that you had outlined, that maybe our boundary should be a little broader.
All right. All right. Well, thank everyone for your comments. I know that staff got a lot of notes on this.
Mayor, can I make one other comment? I said it before on the curbside pickup, but I just wanted to emphasize the point because over the last year, our family has pretty consistently ordered takeout from downtown restaurants every Saturday night. And the advantage of having a 17-year-old is you could send him downtown to pick it up for you. The problem has been that there seems to have not been enough curbside pickup spots, especially on Locust. So there was one time where he went down there and came back without the food. And that was very disappointing. So we've had to send now 2 people out because of the seemingly lack of curbside pickup spots. And I just want to make sure that point doesn't get lost. I think there are a number of people probably like that who care about that. And in terms of the one-way streets or street closures, I'd like to hear from our traffic engineering team, not a full-blown study, but just I'd like their input on that before we get too far down the road on it.
Cindy.
Based on all the comments that I've heard, and as we've cycled back, it seems like my summary would be continue with where we've been, continue down the main path through the emergency and further if possible, longer into the year, and then start figuring out what not to do in the future, what to change, and what significant changes. So it would be, but there's time. We don't have to tomorrow figure out whether to close Main Street or turn it into a one-way street. Am I summarizing what we've all said?
Right. But the only thing I would add to that is that a lot of these businesses are looking for some kind of direction of how long this will go. And if they're going to invest the money into an outdoor structure, they want to have some direction that it would last past August. And it sounds like our desire is for it to last past August. We didn't talk about it being seasonal. We didn't talk about it going for another year, but we did talk about it going further.
And I think the seasonality versus year round will fall out from what the restaurants tell us.
Mm-hmm.
Because if no one wants to be outdoors in the winter and the restaurants aren't willing to do it over the long haul, then we won't be doing it. Would be my best guess. Thank you.
Yeah, and seasonality could be 9 months of the year because there's really only 3 months that are uncomfortable to be outside. Although I think a lot of us did it anyway. There was no.
If we don't get any more rain,
Yeah.
Dan, Terry, do you want to go to the next step slides to just recap what we'll do next based upon the feedback we heard here tonight, and we'll go from there.
Yeah, that'd be great. So thank you all so much for your feedback. We'll take what we've heard this evening. Obviously, we need to go back and have some more discussion with our businesses downtown as well as our downtown association. We'll come back to you in the coming weeks or months, depending on how those discussions go. We'll determine how quickly we get back to you with some more detailed options. What I heard this evening is we'll look at how far out we can extend our current setup in a way that supports both our restaurants and our retail. We'll work on defining the criteria, and then obviously we'll have to take some council actions along the way. So we'll be back at the drawing board, taking in your feedback back and coming up with a more concrete plan. So thank you for taking some options off the table. That's actually such an important first step for us. to start to design something more sustainable. So thank you again, and we look forward to continuing the dialogue.
Great. Thank you all. This has been, I think this has been really helpful for every one of us. Okay, we have 2 more items. I'm not sure how long we expect them to be, but we could probably all use about a 10-minute break to at least stand up and get a drink of water or something like that. So let's meet back at 9:30, and we hopefully can finish up those last 2 items after that. Thanks. All right, and we are back. We're halfway done. Hopefully more than halfway done. All right, next is public hearing. Next on the agenda is a public hearing item titled Approve the 2021-2022 Annual Action Plan for the CDBG funds and funding plan for community grant programs. So I invite the staff to provide the staff presentation at this time.
Can I get access to host or sharing my screen, please?
You should be able to. There we go.
There we go.
All right. Good evening, Mayor Wilk and members of the council. My name is Shaluna Vienne, and I am the city's Affordable Housing and Grants Coordinator. Tonight, I'll be presenting on the annual action plan for the Community Development Block Grant Program, CDBG, and the funding plan for the community grant programs. The federal CDBG program's primary objective is to develop viable urban communities by providing decent housing, a suitable living environment, and expanded economic opportunities, principally for low-income persons. In order to receive fundings, entitlement communities are required to submit a 5-year consolidated plan addressing and identifying the city's priority needs and goals, which council adopted in May of 2020. Additionally, each jurisdiction is required to develop a 1-year annual action plan describing its priority needs and identifying the resources and strategy towards meeting those needs. The action plan before you tonight covers the 2nd year of the 5-year consolidated planning period. Along with the CDBG program, the city's community grant program consists of the locally funded Community Services Grant, CSG, the locally funded Homeless Services Grant, HSG, and also the State Permanent Local Housing Allocation, PLHA. The local and state grant program primarily supplement the public services portion of the CDBG program and is included in the annual action plan. Although the focus of the annual action plan is on the use of the CDBG fund, it also describes how the city will use other resources, such as the general fund, in addressing the priority needs. The community grant program funding process operates on an alternating 2- and 3-year funding cycle. The current cycle is 2020-2022. At the beginning of the cycle, the city held a competitive grant application process, and awards are based on the program's ability to meet the consolidated plan high priority needs. Fiscal year 21-22 is a renewal year. Applicants applying for renewal were advised to reapply at the same funding level as fiscal year 2021, though funding amounts are contingent upon funding available and past performance. This chart here shows the available funding across the 4 grant programs of up to $765,854, and it also shows the available funding in 2 different ways. The funding sources include the CDBG allocation, the estimated CDBG carry forward funds, the city's CSG and HSG programs funded by the general fund, and also the estimated PLHA allocation. This table also shows the breakdown of the funds available by category. HUD has certain caps on program admin and public services. So CSG, HSG, and PLHA funds primarily supplement the public services budget. On March 16th, the Housing and Community Development Committee, made up of Councilmember Darling and Councilmember Silva, held a public meeting to review and come up with funding recommendations for the community grant programs. The HCD committee is recommending the 21-22 funding plan, which is presented at tonight's meeting and includes funding for 26 programs plus funding for administration. For the CDBG and CSG funding plan, Since fiscal year 21-22 is a renewal year, existing subrecipients were recommended for funding again. Public services recommended for funding include crisis lines, child sexual assault prevention, legal services for seniors, meal delivery services, and homeless outreach and prevention, just to name a few. The HCD committee is also recommending one new public facility project for the Civic Park Community Center to increase the accessibility for the disabled at $177,512. The city has designated $215,449 to address homelessness in Walnut Creek. Under the HSG and PLHA funding plan, existing subrecipients were recommended for funding again, with the exception of Trinity Center's Safe Parking Program, primarily due to its non-operation from the loss of its host site at St. John Vianney. The funds were recommended to be redirected to the designated core team, which we'll talk more about on the next slide. For the past 4 years, the city has partnered with Concord to contract for a full-time homeless outreach team. Concord and Walnut Creek would split the costs, and each would have the team Monday to Friday for 4 hours. Concord is no longer able to partner with Walnut Creek, and they are now able to fund a full-time core program on their own. The HCD committee is recommending to contract for a full-time core team for the fiscal year 21-22 program year. In this upcoming year, we are also going to see an increase of 41%. The chart here is the proposed funding plan for the designated full-time core team. There is a gap of $117,565, which may be covered from other sources, including the federal stimulus, other grant funds, or the general fund. The HCD committee is also recommending these backup funding scenarios. The CDBG program has a timeliness expenditure requirement where funds need to be expended by a certain date. The city receives program income from repaid loans and may have more carry forward funds than anticipated. Approving these CDBG backup funding scenarios now will allow staff to move more quickly to expend funds and meet HUD's timeliness expenditure requirement. Additionally, staff received written confirmation from the state just today that the PLHA funding allocation is $215,000, which is higher than anticipated. Staff anticipates coming back to council at a later date for a state plan amendment. So the Housing and Community Development Committee is recommending that City Council adopt the attached resolution, which approves of the 21-22 annual action plan, including the proposed funding plan for the CDBG, CSG, HSG, and PLHA programs and backup funding scenario. And with that said, that is the end of my presentation, and I'd be happy to answer any questions that you may have. Thank you.
Terrific. Thank you, Sharluna. Let me ask council. I'm looking for your hands if anybody has any questions. Cindy Silva.
Thank you very much. And as I noticed in our housing committee meeting, you make very clear presentations, and that's really helpful. It's good news that we received additional funding from the PLHA. Could you say again what that is and what it can be used for? All these abbreviations.
Yeah, the Permanent Local Housing Allocation, PLHA, it's administered by the State Department of Housing and Community Development. And the funds can be used to address homelessness or to implement plans to address or to increase the affordable housing stock. The PLHA funds are ongoing and non-competitive for entitlement communities like Walnut Creek. So in that sense, it operates like the CDBG program. And in order to receive the funding, council has to adopt a resolution to request and be a recipient of the funding. And it's over a 5-year period since it's on a 5-year funding cycle. So in 5 more years, we'll be back again to council. And this allocation changes year to year. And this program, once again, is continuous unless there was a legislative act to terminate the program.
So we can expect to receive these funds year over year unless the state budget goes into disarray.
Correct, yes. And after 5 years, council will just have to adopt another resolution to continue this program.
On the CDBG carry forward funds, can you explain again what the source of those are?
Yeah, so the carry forward funds, there are three main things that go into it. So for our contracts, it starts on the fiscal year of July 1st and ends June 30th. So subrecipients who don't expend their funds by June 30th, that money just goes into a pot of funds, and then that is also carry forward.
Okay.
The second thing is that we do get program income from repaid loans, and then that just goes into the available funding that year. So if that fund is unused or unallocated, then that is also carry forward funds. And lastly, the majority of our funds go towards IPF projects, infrastructure and public facility and housing. And sometimes we don't allocate all the funds, or it's not used, then that fund once again also rolls into that pot of fund and is carry forward. And in this instance, for this upcoming year, those three sources make up the carry forward fund.
Which the carry forward seems to be quite large. It's almost about a sixth of our total, seventh of the total funds that we have.
Yeah, it is quite large. We did get around $60,000 in program income. And once again, we can't anticipate that, but it's a good thing because then we have more funds for our infrastructure and public facility projects.
Including the project in the ADA improvements in the park facility, correct? And lastly, I would ask, is there anything that we had to underfund either a year ago or this year because of COVID-19 and our budgets?
Yeah, luckily, we didn't have to underfund anyone, even though we did face budget cuts for the CSG and HSG program. And that's because the CDBG program, HUD waived the 15% public services cap last year, as long as the program addressed COVID. So we did make it work. And we also did have the PLHA funds come into the picture during the pandemic. So the HSG budget was originally $200,000, but $130,000 of that was swapped with PLHA funds, but essentially just making the budget still whole for the homeless services grant.
Thank you. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you. Any other questions from council? Cindy Darling?
Thanks, and thank you guys. It was great being on HCD because I learned A, B, C, D, E, F, G, and all the alphabets. When we talked about the core team, I know I've heard from Dan Buckshee that he is continuing to search for another partner, but we also talked about having a dollars and cents discussion with the county because the cost of a core team basically went up far more than you would expect just based on regular inflation. Have you guys gotten anywhere with the county on understanding why the core team is so much more expensive in a year?
Yeah, so Margo and I did talk to the county health services to try to ask how this increase came about. And we are still in the process of negotiating with CORE for the phase-in costs. But what they told us is that, year to year, we're not actually, it's not actually a 41% increase. But when they first formed the budget 4 years ago, they didn't actually capture the full cost of a designated core team. So what they did was they actually absorbed the cost in the past 4 years through a separate grant or a separate source. And that grant is ending this June 30th. They did say to us that we are not the only ones that are surprised by this cost, but they are willing to work with us. And Margo and I are still in the process of negotiating.
And just look mean at them and say, why is this cost so much more? All right, thank you guys.
All right. I don't see any other council questions. So let's see if we have any public comment at this time. And I'll again say that for any member of the public wishing to provide public comments at this time, please use the raise hand feature or press *9. If you'd like to provide public comment, as a reminder, each speaker will have 2 minutes to make their oral remarks on this item. And after 2 minutes, the Zoom feed will automatically cut off. Written comments submitted have been and will be posted during this time to the city's website for public review. Do we have any comments?
Mayor, I don't see any hands raised for public comment.
Okay, so we'll close the public comment period, bring it back to council for any further discussion. Does any council member have any further comments to make or a motion?
I will move to adopt a resolution approving the 2021-2022 annual action plan, including the proposed funding plan for the CDB, CSG, HSD, and PLHA programs, as well as the backup funding scenario.
And I will second that without repeating the letters.
We have a first and a second. Susie, can you take the roll, please?
Councilmember Silva?
Aye.
I'm sorry, Councilmember Silva? I didn't.
Aye.
Councilmember Darling?
Aye.
Councilmember Haskell?
Aye.
Mayor Pro Tem Francois?
Aye.
And Mayor Wilk.
Aye.
Motion carries unanimously.
All right, thank you. Next, we have the, scroll down here, the Tax Equity and Fiscal Responsibility Act, TEFRA, public hearing for California Enterprise Development Authority and Berean Christian High School of Contra Costa County. So if we could please have the staff report, and then we will follow that by the applicant.
Yes, hi. Good evening, Mayor and council members. Thank you for hanging in there for this one last item on your very full agenda for tonight. Colette Hanna, Economic Development Manager, and I'll be introducing bond counsel for this item, who'll provide a very brief presentation. For organizations looking to receive some sort of tax exempt financing, they are required to present the item at a public hearing in the jurisdiction where they are located. Berean Christian High School, located at 245 El Divisadero Avenue, is seeking a refinancing through the California Enterprise Development Authority. There's no financial obligation of the city, just the hosting of this public hearing. Sam Balassi, partner with QTAC Rock and bond counsel for the project, will provide a bit more information on the purpose of a TEFRA hearing and the action council is being asked to take. So I will turn it over to Sam, Mr. Balassi.
Good evening, Mayor and City Council. Thanks for hanging in there. I know it's been a long night, so we'll try to make this pretty quick. We're coming back to you tonight, just as we did last year, for a public hearing and an approval for mostly federal income tax purposes for a refinancing for the benefit of Berean Christian High School. Berean Christian High School is obviously located in the city. There is some outstanding debt that the school is looking to refinance. Because they're a nonprofit organization and the facilities are basically used for pretty much secular activities, we can do a tax exempt refinancing through the code and through the Joint Powers Authority and provide them with a lower interest rate than that's available in the taxable market. That's really essentially all it is. There's the opportunity to use some proceeds for improvements, a new turf and things of that nature. We provided a presentation and I'm happy to go through it. It's just a 4-page presentation, but I know it's been a long evening, so I can open it up for questions, and I'm happy to answer any questions that you have. Otherwise whatever works for the council.
Terrific. Thank you, Sam. Well, let's see if we have any questions by council. I'm seeing a shaking of heads. So, nope, hold on. Cindy Silva, raise your hand.
So it sounds like Berean Christian is looking to refinance existing debt, not necessarily take out new debt for new capital projects.
That's correct. Yeah.
Okay, so in case people ask us in the grocery store, they're not going to expand the school.
No, there's no school expansion at all.
Right.
That would require the city's approval anyway.
Exactly, but it's always good to have that clear. Thank you.
Absolutely.
Thank you. All right, and do we have any public comments then?
Mayor, I don't see any hands raised for public comment.
Just in case somebody is watching on TV and needs a minute or so, I'll just quickly say if any member of the public which would like to provide a public comment, please raise your hand or press *9 if you're connected by audio if you'd like to provide that public comment. You'll have 2 minutes, and the Zoom feed for each speaker will cut off automatically at 2 minutes. If you have a written comment, that can be submitted, and it will be posted to the city's website for public review and are included in the meeting record. It will not separately be read into the record. So looks like we still don't have anybody looking to speak, so we'll bring it back to council.
May I make a motion?
You may indeed.
Thank you. I'm going to, since we have already by definition held our public hearing on the proposed obligation, I move to adopt the resolution approving the issuance of the obligation.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. City Clerk, can you please read the roll call?
Councilmember Haskew,
Aye.
Mayor Pro Tem Francois,
Aye.
Councilmember Darling,
Aye.
Councilmember Silva,
Aye.
and Mayor Wilk.
Aye.
Motion carries unanimously.
All right, and that.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Congratulations. Thank you. All right, this brings us to adjournment of the concurrent regular meetings of the City Council and Parking Authority. And unless there's any further comment, this will adjourn us for the next couple of weeks until our next regular City Council meeting. Good night, everyone.
Aye.